Tonight, we explore a profound teaching in Zen called the Great Doubt. This is not the kind of doubt that makes us feel lost or hopeless. It is a way of being that can bring extraordinary peace into our lives. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The Great Doubt is like a door that opens inward. When we are willing to truly question, to sit with not knowing, something unexpected can happen. The mind grows quiet. The heart grows spacious. We discover a kind of peace that does not depend on having all the answers. Tonight, we will explore this teaching through stories and reflections. We will meet people who found that their deepest questions led them not to confusion, but to clarity. Not to despair, but to a gentle awakening. Let your body settle wherever you are resting. There is nothing you need to figure out right now. Nothing you need to solve. Simply listen and let these ancient teachings wash over you like gentle rain into earth. The stories will carry you. The wisdom will find its way in. Take a slow, deep breath and let's begin our journey together. There is an old saying in Zen that goes like this: great doubt, great awakening. Small doubt, small awakening. No doubt, no awakening. At first, this might seem strange. We usually think of doubt as something negative, something to overcome. We want to feel certain, to have solid answers that we can hold on to. But Zen points to a different kind of doubt. Not the anxious worry that keeps us up at night, and not the cynical suspicion that closes our hearts. The great doubt is something else entirely. It is a profound willingness to question, to look beneath the surface of things, to wonder about what we have always assumed to be true. Most of us walk through life with a set of beliefs we have never really examined. We believe we know who we are, what makes us happy, and how life works. These beliefs feel solid and reliable, and they give us a sense of security. But sometimes, if we are honest, we notice a quiet unease beneath all our certainties. There is a feeling that something important is being missed, that our understanding, however complete it seems, is somehow not enough. This unease is not a problem to be solved, but rather an invitation, an opening towards something deeper. The great doubt begins when we become willing to question not just the small things, but the fundamental things. Who am I, really? What is this life? What remains when all my ideas and opinions fall away? These are not questions that the thinking mind can answer with a neat explanation. They are questions that open us and soften the rigid walls of what we think we know. Zen teaches that this opening is essential. Without it, we remain trapped in our familiar patterns, our comfortable certainties. We miss the aliveness that exists beneath our concepts. The great doubt is like a key that unlocks a door we did not even know was there. Let us explore a story that shows this teaching. In a prosperous city known for its schools and libraries, there lived a man named Jiro who had devoted his life to learning. From childhood, he had loved knowledge. He memorized texts that others found difficult. He asked questions that impressed his teachers. By the time he was grown, he had studied philosophy, history, medicine, and the movements of the stars. People came from distant towns to consult him on difficult matters. Jiro took pride in his learning. When someone posed a question, he could usually provide an answer. When debates arose, he could argue any position with skill and confidence. His mind was sharp, his memory vast, his reasoning precise. By any measure, he was a successful man, respected and accomplished, certain of his place in the world. But in quiet moments, when the visitors had gone and the books lay closed on his desk, Jiro sometimes felt a strange emptiness. He could not name it exactly. It was like a room that looked full but felt hollow. He had accumulated so much knowledge, yet something essential seemed to be missing. He told himself this feeling would pass. Perhaps he simply needed to learn more. Perhaps there was some field of study he had neglected, some wisdom tradition he had not yet explored. He threw himself into new subjects with renewed energy. He traveled to distant cities to study with famous teachers. He filled more shelves with more books. But the emptiness remained, quiet and persistent, like a guest who would not leave. One autumn, Jiro heard about an old teacher who lived in the mountains outside the city. People spoke of her with a kind of reverence that puzzled him. She had written no books. She held no formal position. She simply lived in a small hut and received visitors who climbed the long path to see her. Some said she was wise. Others said she was strange. Jiro decided to see for himself. The climb took most of a day. The path wound through forests of maple and pine, crossing streams on mossy stones. By the time Jiro reached the hut, he was tired and his robes were dusty. But his mind was already preparing the questions he would ask, the knowledge he would display. The teacher was an old woman named Sumi. Her face was deeply lined, her hair white as snow. She sat on a worn cushion outside her hut, watching the evening light fade over the mountains. She did not seem surprised to see Jiro. "I have come to learn from you," Jiro announced, settling himself on a rock across from her. "I have studied with many teachers and read many books. I seek wisdom wherever it can be found." Sumi looked at him with calm, unhurried eyes. "What do you know?" she asked. Jiro brightened. This was a question he could answer. He began to speak about his studies, the philosophies he had mastered, the systems of thought he had compared and analyzed, the debates he had won. He spoke for a long time, his words flowing easily, each sentence demonstrating the breadth of his learning. Sumi listened without expression. When he finally paused, she nodded slowly. "You know many things," she said. "Your cup is very full." "Yes," Jiro agreed, pleased that she recognized his accomplishment. "I have worked hard to fill it." "Then I cannot help you." Jiro blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "A cup that is already full cannot receive anything new. You have come seeking wisdom, but there is no room in you for it. Every space is already occupied by what you think you know." Jiro felt a flicker of irritation. He had climbed all this way to be told he knew too much? But surely knowledge is valuable. Surely learning is the path to wisdom. "Knowledge can be valuable," Sumi agreed. "But it can also become a wall, a prison of certainty that keeps out what is new and alive." She paused, looking at him with something like compassion. "Tell me, with all your learning, are you at peace? Is your mind quiet? Is your heart satisfied?" The question struck Jiro like a cold wind. He opened his mouth to give a confident answer, but the words would not come. The hollow feeling he had tried so long to ignore rose up in him. "No," he admitted finally. "I am not at peace." I have everything a learned man should have, but something is missing. That is why I came." Sumi nodded, as if she had expected this. "Your knowledge has given you answers, but it has not given you rest. Perhaps what you need is not another answer. Perhaps what you need is a question. A question, yes. A question you cannot answer with your books. A question that will not be satisfied by clever reasoning. A question that will stay with you, working beneath all your certainties until something opens." She leaned forward slightly. "Here is your question. Take it with you when you leave. Do not try to answer it with your thinking mind. Just let it live in you. Let it do its work." She paused for a long moment. "Who are you when you are not being the one who knows?" Jiro felt something shift in his chest. The question seemed simple, but when he tried to answer it, his mind went blank. He was always the one who knew things. That was who he was. His identity, his purpose, his entire sense of himself was built on knowing. If he was not the one who knew, then who was he? "I do not know," he said slowly. Sumi smiled for the first time. That is the beginning. Jiro stayed with Sumi for several days. She did not teach him in the way his other teachers had. She gave him no books to read, no systems to memorize. She simply went about her daily tasks and let him watch. She cooked simple meals. She swept the ground around her hut. She sat in silence, looking at the mountains. And occasionally, without warning, she would ask him, "Who are you when you are not being the one who knows?" Each time, Jiro found himself unable to answer. His mind would reach for something, anything, to say, but everything it offered felt false. He was not his titles. He was not his reputation. He was not the books he had read or the debates he had won. Those were things he had accumulated, costumes he had worn. But who was beneath all that? What remained when the costumes were removed? The question stayed with him when he left the mountain. It stayed with him as he returned to his home and his library and his visitors. It whispered beneath his conversations and his readings and his daily activities. He could not escape it. He could not answer it. He could only let it be there, a quiet fire burning away at his certainties. Months passed. Jiro continued his work, but something had changed. He noticed that his need to be right had softened. He listened more and spoke less. When someone asked him a question, he no longer rushed to demonstrate his knowledge. Sometimes he simply said, "I do not know," and felt no shame in it. In fact, those words began to feel strangely freeing. The hollow feeling that had haunted him for so long began to change. It was still there, but it no longer felt like emptiness. It felt more like space. Room for something new. Room for wonder. Room for not knowing. One evening, sitting alone in his study, Jiro realized that the question had done its work. He still could not answer it with words, but something had shifted. The tight grip of certainty had loosened. The walls of what he thought he knew had grown more transparent. Through them, he glimpsed something vast and open that had always been there, hidden beneath his accumulation of knowledge. He could not describe what he saw. It was not another piece of information to add to his collection. It was more like a dissolving, a releasing. The one who knew so much was still there, but he no longer took himself so seriously. He was no longer a wall. He was more like a window, Years later, people still came to consult Jiro on difficult matters. His knowledge remained useful, but those who knew him noticed something different about him now. A lightness. A willingness to say, "I do not know," without any loss of dignity. An openness that made people feel at ease in his presence. When young scholars asked him for advice, he often told them about the old woman in the mountain, about the question she had given him, about how the great doubt had cracked open his certainty and let something else shine through. "Do not be afraid of not knowing," he would tell them. "Your questions are not obstacles to wisdom. They may be the path itself." This story shows us something important about the great doubt. Jiro had filled himself with answers, but the answers had become a kind of prison. It was only when he received a question he could not answer that something began to open. Zen teaches us that certainty can be a trap. We cling to what we think we know because it makes us feel safe. But this clinging keeps us small. It prevents us from growing. It blocks the fresh air of wonder from entering our lives. The great doubt is not about rejecting everything we have learned. It is about holding our knowledge more lightly, about remaining open to the possibility that there is always more to discover, about having the courage to sit with questions that have no easy answers. Buddhism shows us that much of our suffering comes from grasping. We grasp at things, at people, at ideas, and we hold them tightly because we fear what might happen if we let go. The great doubt invites us to loosen our grip on our certainties and to discover that not knowing is not a failure, but an opening. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a valley where rivers met and parted, there lived a potter named Hana, who was known throughout the region for her bowls. They were simple things, meant for everyday use, but there was something about them that people treasured. They felt right in the hands. They made ordinary meals feel more satisfying. People kept her bowls for generations, passing them down to children and grandchildren. Hana had learned her craft from her mother, who had learned from her mother before her. The techniques were old and proven. The clay came from a particular riverbank. The glaze was mixed according to a recipe passed down through many hands. The firing followed rhythms established long ago. Hana knew exactly how to make a good bowl, and she made them well, year after year. But in her 40th year of working with clay, something began to trouble her. It started as a small feeling, easy to dismiss. A restlessness as she sat at her wheel. A vague dissatisfaction as she looked at her finished pieces. They were good bowls. Everyone said so. Yet Hana found herself wondering, was this all there was? She had mastered her craft. She knew all the answers about clay and glaze and fire. She could predict exactly how each piece would turn out. This predictability had once felt like mastery. Now it began to feel like a kind of death. Where was the surprise? Where was the mystery? Where was the aliveness she had felt as a young potter, when each piece was an adventure? One day, a traveling monk stopped at her workshop to ask for water. Hana invited him to rest in the shade while she finished her work at the wheel. The monk watched her hands shape the clay with practiced ease. "You are very skilled," he observed. "I have been doing this for 40 years, Hana replied. "The work knows itself by now. My hands know what to do without thinking." "And does this satisfy you?" Hana paused. The question caught her off guard. "It should satisfy me," she said slowly. I do good work. People value what I make. I have nothing to complain about. But does it satisfy you? The monk asked again gently. The restlessness Hana had been trying to ignore rose up in her. No, she admitted. I do not know why, but no. Something is missing. The monk nodded as if this were expected. When we master something completely, when all the questions are answered and all the problems solved, we sometimes lose touch with the life in it. The mystery drains away. We become like someone who has memorized a poem so thoroughly that they no longer hear the music in the words. What can I do? Hana asked. I cannot unlearn what I know. I cannot pretend not to understand my craft. No, the monk agreed. But you can question it. Not to destroy your knowledge, but to refresh it. To let the mystery back in. Ask yourself questions you think you already know the answers to. Look at the clay as if you had never seen clay before. Wonder about the fire as if its workings were still a secret. Let yourself not know, even about the things you know best. After the monk left, Hana sat with his words. They seemed strange and impractical. She had spent decades learning the answers. Now she was supposed to question them, but the restlessness remained, and she had no other remedy. So she began, tentatively, to experiment. When she sat at her wheel, instead of reaching for the familiar certainty, she tried to approach the clay with fresh eyes. What is this material, really? How does it respond to my touch? What does it want to become? At first, nothing happened. Her hands moved in the same old patterns. Her mind supplied the same old answers. But she persisted, day after day, letting questions arise rather than reaching for solutions. Then, slowly, something began to shift. She started noticing things she had overlooked for years. The way the clay had different qualities on different days, responding to weather and moisture in subtle ways. The way her own mood affected the shapes that emerged. The way each bowl, even when made with the same techniques, had its own character, its own presence. She began to experiment with small changes. What if she let the wheel spin a little slower? What if she used slightly more water? What if she trusted her hands to move in ways she had not planned? The results were unpredictable. Some pieces failed. Some came out misshapen or cracked. But others surprised her with a beauty she could not have achieved through certainty alone. One morning, Hana was working on a bowl when something unexpected happened. She had been sitting with a question, one that had grown larger in her mind over the weeks. What if I do not know what this bowl is supposed to be? She let her hands move without direction. She let the clay suggest its own form. She let go of her 40 years of knowing and simply wondered. The bowl that emerged was unlike anything she had made before. It was slightly asymmetrical, with a gentle curve that no plan would have produced. The walls were thinner in some places, thicker in others, in a way that felt alive rather than imperfect. When she held it in her hands, it felt different, more real, more present, as if the bowl itself was awake. Hana stared at it for a long time. She realized that her certainty had been holding something back. By knowing exactly what each bowl should be, she had prevented something else from coming through. Something that only emerged when she was willing not to know. She continued to make bowls in the old way too. Her customers still needed reliable pieces for their homes. But she also set aside time for wondering, for questioning. for letting the clay teach her things she had thought she already knew. These pieces were fewer, and not all of them succeeded. But the ones that did had a quality she could not explain. People noticed. They said these bowls felt different in their hands, alive in a way the others were not. When her own daughter began learning the craft, Hana taught her all the traditional techniques. She passed down the knowledge of clay and glaze and fire that had been given to her. But she also taught her something else. When you have learned all the answers, she told her daughter, do not stop there. Keep asking. Let yourself wonder. The great doubt is not the enemy of mastery. It is what keeps mastery alive. This story shows us another face of the great doubt. Hana had mastered her craft so completely that the mystery had drained away. It was only when she began to question what she knew, to wonder again, that the aliveness returned. Zen teaches us that questions are not just steps toward answers. Sometimes the questioning itself is the point. When we approach life with genuine wonder, when we remain willing to be surprised, something opens in us. We become available to what is actually here, rather than being trapped in our ideas about what should be here. The Buddha spoke often about beginner's mind, the mind that approaches each moment as if for the first time, free of assumptions and full of curiosity. The great doubt is not so different. It is a willingness to question even what we think we have figured out, to let our certainties become permeable, and to discover that not knowing can be a gift rather than a problem. We do not need to throw away what we have learned. Our knowledge serves us in many ways, but we can hold it more lightly. We can remain open to the possibility that there is always something more, something unexpected, something that our certainties have hidden from view. The great doubt is not despair. It is a kind of love, a love for truth that is willing to question everything in order to find what is real. A love for life that refuses to settle for dead certainties. A love for the mystery at the heart of things that no amount of knowledge can fully capture. Take a gentle breath now and let yourself settle. There is nothing you need to figure out in this moment, and that is perfectly fine. In our daily lives, we ask questions because we want answers, which is less than #0. 5# is greater than, where did I put my keys? What time does the shop close? How do I solve this problem at work? These questions serve a practical purpose, and when we find the answers, the questions dissolve. We move on to the next thing. But there is another kind of question, one that works differently. These are questions that cannot be answered in the usual way. They are not puzzles to be solved, but doorways to be entered. When we sit with them, they do not lead us to a conclusion. Instead, they open something in us that was closed. Zen Buddhism has long used this kind of question as a tool for awakening. The great masters discovered that certain questions, held deeply and sincerely, could loosen the grip of the thinking mind and allow something else to shine through. These questions were not meant to produce clever answers. They were meant to exhaust the mind's usual strategies and bring the seeker to a place beyond concepts. This may sound difficult or confusing, but it is actually quite natural. We have all had moments when a question stopped us in our tracks, when something we saw or heard or felt made us pause and wonder in a way that went deeper than thought. In those moments, the question was not a problem to be solved, but rather a kind of opening, a gap in our usual busyness where something quieter could be felt. Think of a child who asks, Why is the sky blue? We can give them a scientific explanation about light and atmosphere, and they may nod and accept it. But often they ask again, but why? They are not really asking for more information. They are expressing wonder, touching the mystery that exists beneath all our explanations. That wonder, that willingness to keep asking even when answers have been given, is a kind of natural doubt that opens rather than closes. The great doubt often begins with a question like this, not a question we answer and move past, but one we carry with us. One that works on us slowly, beneath the surface, changing us in ways we cannot predict. Let us explore a story that shows how such a question found one young woman. In a town built along the banks of a slow-moving river, there lived a young woman named Yuki, who had always been quick with answers. From childhood, she had excelled at her studies. She could solve problems that puzzled others, find patterns that escaped most eyes, and explain complicated things in simple words. Teachers praised her sharp mind. Friends came to her when they needed help thinking through difficulties. Yuki enjoyed being the one who understood. There was a satisfaction in taking something confusing and making it clear, in finding the solution that had eluded others. Her mind was like a tool she had learned to use well, and she used it constantly, applying it to every situation she encountered. When she was 20 years old, Yuki heard about a teacher named Master Ren who lived in a small temple on the other side of the river. People said he was wise, though they could rarely explain why. When asked what he taught, they would grow quiet and thoughtful, as if the question itself was harder than it seemed. This intrigued Yuki. She decided to visit him and see what wisdom he might offer. The temple was old and simple, surrounded by bamboo groves that rustled in the wind. Master Ren was an elderly man with kind eyes and an unhurried way of moving. He received Yuki in a small room that looked out onto a garden of moss and stones. "I have come to learn from you," Yuki said. "I have heard you are wise, and I wish to understand what you understand." Master Ren smiled gently. "What is it you want to know?" Yuki had prepared for this. She had a list of philosophical questions she wanted to discuss, problems she had been pondering, ideas she wanted to test against a wise mind. She began to lay them out, one after another, showing the depth of her thinking. Master Ren listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You have a good mind," he said. "You think clearly and express yourself well. But I wonder if all this thinking has brought you peace." Yuki paused. It was not the response she had expected. "I enjoy thinking," she said carefully. "It is what I do well." "Yes, I can see that. But enjoying something and finding peace in it are not always the same. Does your mind ever rest? Or does it spin constantly, always looking for the next problem to solve, the next question to answer?" Yuki felt a flicker of recognition. It was true that her mind rarely stopped. Even in quiet moments, it was working, analyzing, comparing, planning. She had always seen this as a strength, but now she wondered if it might also be a kind of burden. "It does spin," she admitted. "But is that not just how minds work?" "Some minds spin more than others," Master Ren replied. "And sometimes the spinning becomes a habit that prevents us from seeing what is right in front of us. We become so busy thinking about life that we forget to live it." He paused and looked at her with something like compassion. "I would like to give you something. Not an answer, but a question. A different kind of question than you are used to. This question cannot be solved with your usual thinking. If you try to answer it that way, you will only go in circles. But if you carry it with you, let it live in you without forcing an answer, it may show you something your thinking mind cannot reach. Yuki felt both curious and skeptical. She had always solved questions by thinking about them. What other way was there? "What is the question?" she asked. Master Ren was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What did your face look like before your parents were born?" Yuki blinked. The question made no sense. She had not existed before her parents were born. She had no face then. The question seemed absurd, like asking what color silence was or how much happiness weighed. "I do not understand," she said. "That question has no answer." "Perhaps," Master Ren replied. "Or perhaps the answer is not the kind your thinking mind can find. Take the question with you. Do not try to figure it out. Just let it be there, like a stone in your pocket. See what happens over time." Yuki left the temple feeling frustrated. She had come seeking wisdom and had received only a nonsensical riddle. On the walk home, her mind immediately began working on the question, trying to find an angle of approach. Could it be a metaphor for something? Was there a logical trick she was missing? She turned it over and over, but every approach led nowhere. In the days that followed, the question stayed with her. She tried to dismiss it as foolishness, but it kept returning. "What did your face look like before your parents were born?" The words would surface while she was eating breakfast, while she was walking through the market, while she was lying in bed at night. Her mind would reach for an answer and find nothing. It was like trying to grasp water. Weeks passed, and something began to change. Yuki noticed that when the question arose, her usual thinking seemed to pause. For a moment, her mind would reach for its tools and find them useless. In that moment, there was a kind of silence, a gap in the constant spinning. At first, these gaps were brief and unsettling. Yuki was not used to her mind having nothing to do. But gradually, she began to notice something in those gaps, a quiet awareness that existed before her thoughts began, a sense of presence that did not depend on figuring anything out. She returned to Master Ren after several months. "I cannot answer the question," she said. "I have tried every way I know and nothing works. But something strange has happened. When I sit with the question, my thinking stops. Not forever, but for moments. And in those moments, there is something else. A kind of stillness I never noticed before." Master Ren nodded. "This is what the question is for. It is not meant to be answered with the mind. It is meant to stop the mind just for a moment so that you can see what exists beneath all your thinking. The question is a tool for opening a door that thinking keeps closed." "But what is behind the door?" Yuki asked. "That is something you must see for yourself. No explanation I give you will be the same as seeing it directly. But I can tell you this, what you find there is not something new. It is something that has always been here, hidden beneath your busy thoughts. The question does not create it. It simply clears away what was blocking the view." Yuki continued to carry the question with her. She stopped trying to answer it and simply let it be present. When it arose, she would notice the pause in her thinking and rest there for a moment, feeling the stillness that lay beneath. Over time, this practice changed her. She was still quick and capable, still good at solving problems and explaining complicated things. But there was something different now, a spaciousness behind her cleverness that had not been there before. She no longer felt that she had to figure everything out. She could let some questions remain unanswered, let some mysteries stay mysterious. The constant spinning of her mind began to slow, and in the spaces between thoughts, she found a peace she had never known was possible. Years later, when students came to her seeking wisdom, she would sometimes give them impossible questions of their own, not to frustrate them, but to offer them the same gift Master Ren had given her. A question that could not be answered with thinking. A doorway into the silence that exists beneath all our noise. This story shows us something important about the questions used in Zen practice. They are not tests of cleverness or puzzles to be solved. They are tools for going beyond the thinking mind, for opening a space where something deeper can be seen. Zen teaches that our ordinary thinking, useful as it is, can only take us so far. It is like a boat that carries us across a river. On the other side, we must leave the boat behind and walk on land. The thinking mind is good for certain things, but there are dimensions of experience it cannot reach. The impossible question is a way of bringing the thinking mind to its limit and showing us what lies beyond. We spend most of our lives answering questions that have answers. This is necessary and useful, but it can also create a habit of mind that expects every question to be solvable, every mystery to be explainable. When we encounter something that cannot be figured out, we often feel frustrated or inadequate. We think there must be an answer we are missing, a solution we have not yet found. The questions of Zen point us in another direction entirely. They teach us that some things are not meant to be figured out. They are meant to be experienced. They are doorways, not puzzles. When we stop trying to solve them and simply let them work on us, they can open spaces in our consciousness that all our solving could never reach. The Buddha taught that our deepest nature cannot be grasped by concepts. It must be experienced directly. But our minds are so busy generating concepts that we rarely have a moment of direct experience. The great doubt, expressed through questions like the one Master Ren gave Yuki, creates an opening in the constant flow of thought. In that opening, we can glimpse what was always there, waiting to be noticed. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a village nestled among green hills, there lived a farmer named Taro, who had worked the same land his whole life. He was a practical man who valued what was useful and distrusted what was not. He had little patience for philosophy or abstract ideas. Life was about planting and harvesting, about rain and sun, about the simple rhythms that had sustained his family for generations. But when Taro was in his 50th year, something began to trouble him. He could not say exactly what it was. A heaviness had settled over him that the familiar routines no longer lifted. He would stand in his fields at sunset, looking at the mountains in the distance, and feel a strange ache in his chest. Something was calling to him, though he did not know what. His wife noticed the change in him. "You have been quiet lately," she said one evening. "Is something wrong?" "I do not know," Taro replied honestly. "I feel like I am missing something, like there is a question I am supposed to ask, but I do not know what the question is." His wife was a wise woman in her own way. "Perhaps you should talk to old Kenzo," she suggested. "He seems to understand things that others miss." Old Kenzo was a former monk who had returned to the village years ago to live out his remaining days. He kept to himself mostly, tending a small garden behind his cottage, but people said he had a way of seeing into the heart of things. Taro had never spoken with him about anything beyond the weather and the crops. The next morning, Taro found himself walking toward Kenzo's cottage. He felt foolish, a practical farmer seeking advice from an old hermit about a feeling he could not even name. But the heaviness remained, and he did not know where else to turn. Kenzo was sitting outside his cottage, watching the morning mist lift from the hills. He did not seem surprised to see Taro. "Sit with me," he said simply, gesturing to a wooden bench nearby. Taro sat. For a long while, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the mist move and thin, revealing the shapes of trees and hills beneath. Finally, Taro found words. "I do not know why I came. I feel like something is missing, but I cannot say what. I have a good life, a good wife, good land. But lately, there is this weight in my chest that will not lift." Kenzo nodded slowly, as if this were a familiar story. "The weight you feel is a question trying to be born. Your heart is asking something that your mind does not know how to hear." "What question? That is what you must discover. But I can tell you this much. The question is not about your farm or your crops or anything practical. It is about something deeper, something you have been too busy to notice all these years." Taro felt frustrated. "I do not understand. Can you not just tell me what the question is?" Kenzo smiled gently. "If I told you, it would be my question, not yours. The question must arise from your own heart. But I can give you a practice that might help it emerge." He paused, looking out at the hills. "Each morning and each evening, sit quietly for a little while. Do not try to think or figure anything out. Simply ask yourself, silently, 'What is this?' Do not answer. Just let the question be there. Ask it about the weight in your chest. Ask it about the sky, the trees, your own hands. What is this?" Over time, the question will find its own depth. Taro was skeptical. This seemed like a waste of time, sitting and asking a question without trying to answer it. But the weight in his chest was real, and he had no better ideas. So he agreed to try. Each morning before beginning his work, and each evening after finishing, Taro would sit quietly on the edge of his field. He would look at whatever was before him and silently ask, "What is this?" At first, his mind would jump in with answers. "The sky is blue. The tree is an oak. My hands are rough from work." But he learned to let these answers pass and simply stay with the question. Days became weeks. The practice felt strange at first, almost embarrassing. What was a practical farmer doing? Sitting and asking silly questions about trees and sky. But something in him needed this, and so he continued. Gradually, the question began to change. It became less about naming things and more about wondering at them. What is this sky, really? What is this moment of being alive? What is this awareness that looks out from my eyes? The questions had no answers, but they opened something in Taro that had been closed. The weight in his chest began to shift. It was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt more like a door, slightly ajar, with light coming through from the other side. One evening, sitting at the edge of his field as the sun went down, Taro asked his question, and something happened that he would never quite be able to explain. The boundary between himself and what he was looking at seemed to thin and then dissolve. There was just this moment, this light, this presence, with no separation between seer and seen. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, Taro understood why he had felt that weight. He had been carrying around a sense of separation his whole life, a feeling that he was here and the world was out there, divided and alone. In that moment of dissolution, the loneliness he had not even known he was carrying lifted. When the experience passed, Taro sat very still. Tears were running down his face, though he did not feel sad. He felt, for the first time he could remember, completely at home in the world. He went back to old Kenzo the next day. "Something happened," he said. "I cannot explain it. But something opened." Kenzo looked at him and smiled. The question did its work. It kept knocking on a door until the door finally opened, even if only for a moment. Will it happen again? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But you have seen now what was always there. You know it is real. That knowing will stay with you, even when the door seems closed. And you can keep asking your question. It is a good companion for the rest of the journey. Why did the question work when nothing else did? Kenzo considered this. Because you were not trying to get anywhere. You were not trying to figure anything out or achieve any special state. You were simply wondering, openly and honestly, without expectation. That openness is the key. When we try too hard, we close up. When we demand answers, the mystery retreats. But when we wander gently, without grasping, something can reveal itself that our effort would have blocked. Taro returned to his farming, to his practical life of planting and harvesting. But he was not the same man who had walked to Kenzo's cottage that morning. The heaviness was gone, replaced by something lighter and more open. He still asked his questions sometimes, sitting quietly at the edge of his field. And though the great opening did not return in the same way, there were smaller openings, moments of wonder and presence that seasoned his days with a sweetness he had never known. Zen teaches that the truth we seek is not hidden in some distant place. It is right here, in this moment, in this breath, in this ordinary experience. But we are usually too busy with our thoughts and plans and worries to notice it. The question becomes a way of interrupting our usual busyness and opening our eyes to what is already present. There is something almost paradoxical about this. We ask a question because we want to know something. But the questions of Zen work differently. They do not lead to knowledge in the usual sense. They lead to a kind of unknowing that is more intimate with reality than any concept could be. We ask the question not to find information, but to dissolve the barrier that information creates between us and direct experience. This is why the question must be lived rather than answered. When we carry a question without reaching for an answer, something in us stays open. The mind cannot close around a conclusion because there is no conclusion to close around. This openness itself is the beginning of wisdom. The Buddha taught that liberation is not something we achieve through effort alone. It is more like a recognition, a seeing of what was always true. The question helps us look in the right direction. It does not create the truth. It simply clears away the fog of thinking so that the truth can be seen. You may have noticed that both Yuki and Taro received questions that could not be answered in ordinary ways. This is intentional. When a question has an answer, we find the answer and move on. But when a question has no answer, at least no answer the thinking mind can grasp, we must stay with it. We must live with it. And in that living, something can happen that is beyond what thinking can produce. The great doubt is nourished by such questions. It is not doubt in the sense of skepticism or disbelief. It is a profound wondering, a willingness to not know, a staying open to mystery even when the mind wants to close around an answer. This kind of doubt is not a weakness. It is a strength. It keeps us humble, receptive, and alive to what each moment might reveal. We do not need to seek out impossible questions from Zen masters. Life itself offers us questions that cannot be answered if we pay attention. The mystery of why we are here at all. The strangeness of consciousness looking out from our eyes. The fact that anything exists rather than nothing. These are not problems to be solved, but wonders to be felt. When we allow ourselves to feel them, to really sit with them without rushing toward explanations, we are practicing the great doubt in our own way. Let yourself settle now and take a slow breath. The questions can rest for a while, held gently without needing to be answered. We live in a world that rewards knowing. From our earliest years, we are praised for having the right answers. We learn that knowledge brings respect, that certainty brings safety, that the one who knows is the one who leads. This training runs deep in us, shaping how we move through life. And so we gather certainties around us like armor. We build walls of opinion and belief. We decide what is true and hold tightly to those decisions. This gives us a feeling of solid ground, a sense that we understand how things work and where we fit in. But there is a cost to all this certainty. When we are sure we already know, we stop looking. We stop listening. We meet each new moment with old conclusions instead of fresh eyes. Our knowledge, meant to help us, can become a kind of blindness. The great doubt asks us to loosen our grip on what we think we know. This takes courage. It means being willing to stand in the open without the protection of our certainties. It means admitting that we might be wrong, that there might be more to see, that our understanding is incomplete. Zen calls this not knowing, and it is considered a great gift rather than a weakness. When we truly do not know, we are finally available to learn. When we release our grip on old answers, our hands are free to receive something new. Let us explore a story that shows how one teacher discovered this truth. In a city known for its great halls of learning, there lived a teacher named Master Win who was famous for his knowledge. He had spent 40 years studying the old texts and could answer almost any question put to him. Students came from distant provinces to sit at his feet. Scholars sought his opinion on difficult matters. His reputation was such that people spoke his name with reverence. Win had worked hard for this reputation. In his youth, he had been unsure of himself, often afraid of being exposed as ignorant. So he had studied relentlessly, memorizing texts, mastering arguments, filling every gap in his knowledge that he could find. Over the years, his fear had transformed into confidence. He had become the one who knew, and he wore this identity like a fine robe. But in his 60th year, something began to trouble him. A young student named Ami had joined his school, and she asked questions that were different from the others. Where most students wanted to understand the texts better or learn how to argue more skillfully, Ami asked questions that seemed to have no answers. What is awareness made of? Where does a thought come from before it arises? Why is there something rather than nothing? At first, Win tried to answer these questions the way he answered everything else. He drew on his vast learning, citing this text and that authority, constructing careful explanations. But Ami would listen patiently and then ask, "Yes, but what do you actually know about this? Not what the books say, but what you yourself have seen." These questions unsettled Win more than he wanted to admit. The truth was, on the deepest matters, he did not know from his own direct experience. He knew what others had written. He knew how to construct arguments. But when Ami asked what he himself had seen, he found a silence inside that his learning could not fill. He began to avoid Ami's questions, changing the subject or calling on other students. But the questions stayed with him. They followed him home in the evening and met him when he woke in the morning. They exposed something he had been hiding from himself for decades. Beneath all his knowledge, there was a vast territory of not knowing that he had never had the courage to face. One afternoon, Win was teaching a group of advanced students when Ami raised her hand. He felt his stomach tighten but called on her anyway. "Master Win," she said, "you have taught us so much about what the ancient masters said. But I wonder, what have you discovered for yourself? What do you know that did not come from a book?" The room fell silent. Students looked at their teacher expectantly. Win opened his mouth to give one of his usual learned responses, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was exhaustion from carrying his reputation for so long. Perhaps it was the honest curiosity in Ami's eyes. Perhaps it was simply time. "I do not know," he said quietly. The words hung in the air. Students exchanged confused glances. Their teacher, the great Master Win, had just admitted ignorance. "I have read many books," Win continued slowly, as if discovering the words as he spoke them. "I have memorized many teachings. I can tell you what this master said and what that scholar believed. But if you ask me what I myself have seen, what I know in my own bones, I must tell you honestly that it is very little. I have been so busy collecting the knowledge of others that I have rarely stopped to look directly at life itself." The silence in the room deepened. Some students looked uncomfortable. Others looked strangely relieved, as if a tension they had not known they were carrying had suddenly released. Ami smiled softly. "Thank you for your honesty, Master. That admission may be the most valuable thing you have taught us." In the days that followed, something changed in Win. His admission had cracked something open in him. He found himself less interested in displaying his knowledge and more interested in actual inquiry. He began to sit quietly in his garden, not studying texts, but simply looking at the trees, the sky, the movement of light through leaves. He noticed things he had never noticed before, simple things that his busy mind had always hurried past. He noticed the way a sparrow landed on a branch, adjusting its weight with tiny movements. He noticed how the color of the sky shifted gradually as afternoon became evening, a change so slow it was invisible unless you were truly watching. He noticed his own breathing, the gentle rise and fall that happened without his direction. These were not things he could learn from books. They were things that could only be seen by someone who was actually present. At first, this felt strange and unproductive. His whole life had been about accumulating knowledge, building his understanding, adding to what he knew. Now he was simply sitting and looking, not trying to learn anything at all. His mind kept telling him he was wasting time, that there were texts he should be studying, arguments he should be refining. But something deeper in him wanted this stillness, this direct contact with life that all his reading had never provided. Some of his students left, disappointed that their teacher no longer seemed to have all the answers. But others stayed, drawn by something new in Win that had not been there before. There was a freshness to him now, a quality of genuine curiosity. When he taught, he no longer spoke only from books. He spoke from his own wandering, his own not knowing. And somehow, this was more alive than all his previous certainty. One student who stayed was Ami, the young woman whose questions had started his transformation. She came to sit with him in his garden sometimes, and they would simply be there together, not discussing texts or debating ideas, just present with whatever was. "I am sorry if my questions troubled you," she said one afternoon. Win shook his head. "Your questions gave me a gift, though I could not see it at the time. They showed me that I had been hiding behind my learning, using it to avoid facing what I did not know. Now I am learning to be comfortable with not knowing. It is difficult, but it is also a relief." Other teachers heard about what had happened, and some came to see for themselves. A few were scornful. "He has lost his edge," they said. "All those years of study, and now he admits he knows nothing." But others sensed something different. They saw a man who had set down a heavy burden, who had found the courage to stand in the open without the armor of expertise. One old teacher, a woman named Siran, who was known for her wisdom, came to speak with Win. "I heard what you said to your students," she told him. "It took courage." Win shook his head. It did not feel like courage. It felt like surrender. "I simply could not pretend anymore." "That is what courage often feels like," Siran replied. "We think courage means being strong and certain. But sometimes the deepest courage is admitting that we do not know. It means letting go of the image we have built and standing naked before the truth." "I feel like a fool," Win admitted. "I spent 40 years becoming an expert, and now I am starting over like a beginner." Siran smiled. "That is exactly where you need to be. The experts are often the most trapped because they have so much to protect. But the beginner has nothing to lose. The beginner can actually learn because there is room for something new. You have given yourself a great gift, even if it does not feel that way." In the years that followed, Win continued to teach, but his teaching had changed. He still shared from the texts and traditions he knew so well. But he also shared his questions, his wonderings, the places where his understanding ran out. He was not afraid to say, "I do not know," when he did not know. And strangely, this honesty made his teaching more powerful, not less. Students trusted him in a way they had not trusted the old certain Win. They could bring their own doubts and questions without fear of judgment because their teacher was walking the same uncertain path. There was one student, a young man who had arrived full of ambition and certainty, who came to Win after a particularly honest lecture. "I do not understand," he said. "You used to be the greatest authority in the land. Everyone respected your knowledge. Why would you give that up, to become someone who admits he does not know?" Win thought about the question. "When I was certain, I was respected, but I was not free. I had to maintain my image. I had to have answers even when I did not. I was performing knowledge rather than actually seeking truth. Now I am less respected by some, but I am more honest. And honesty, I have discovered, is worth more than reputation." But is it not frightening to not know? Sometimes, Win admitted. But it is also alive. When I was certain, everything was settled. There was nothing new to discover, because I already knew everything I needed to know. Now each day brings something unexpected. I am learning again, truly learning, for the first time in decades. When Win finally died at a very old age, his students did not remember him for his vast learning, though it had been considerable. They remembered him for his honesty, for the day he admitted he did not know, for the way that admission had freed him and freed them to actually seek the truth rather than pretend they had already found it. This story shows us something important about the courage to not know. Win had spent his life building an identity as the one who had answers. But this identity had become a cage. It was only when he found the honesty to admit his not knowing that something genuine could begin. Zen teaches that not knowing is not a failure but an opening. When we admit we do not know, we become available to reality in a new way. We stop defending our positions and start actually looking. This is the beginning of the great doubt, and it takes more courage than certainty ever did. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a land where mountain passes were treacherous and often hidden by snow, there lived a guide named Mira, who led travelers safely through the high routes. She had walked these mountains since childhood and knew them as well as anyone alive. She knew where the safe paths lay, where avalanches were likely to fall, where shelter could be found when storms descended without warning. Mira carried maps that had been passed down through generations of guides. These maps showed the routes that had been used for hundreds of years, marking the dangers and the resting places. She trusted these maps deeply, as her mother had trusted them before her. One spring, Mira was hired to lead a small group of travelers across the highest pass to the valleys beyond. The journey should have taken 4 days. She had made it dozens of times before, but this year was different. The winter had been strange, with unusual warmth followed by sudden freezes. The mountains had shifted in ways the maps did not show. Paths that had been reliable for generations were now blocked by new rockfalls. Landmarks that had guided travelers for centuries had been buried or altered. On the second day, Mira realized that her maps were no longer accurate. The path they showed simply did not exist anymore. A great slide had reshaped the terrain so completely that she stood in a landscape she did not recognize, even though she had walked here many times before. The travelers looked at her expectantly, trusting her expertise. She felt a moment of panic. She was the guide. She was supposed to know the way. Her entire identity was built on knowing these mountains. She looked at her map again, as if staring at it might make the familiar path reappear. But the lines on paper no longer matched the rock and snow before her. The knowledge she had carried all her life was suddenly useless. One of the travelers, an elderly man named Chu, noticed her confusion. "Is something wrong?" Mira took a breath. She could pretend confidence, make a guess, and hope for the best. She had done that before, on smaller matters. But this was serious. A wrong choice in these mountains could be deadly. "The path I know is gone," she said finally. "The mountain has changed. My maps do not show what is here now." The travelers murmured with worry. A young woman looked frightened. A man began to argue that they should turn back. Chu raised his hand for quiet. "Let me understand. You are saying that what you knew before does not apply here? Yes, Mira admitted, the word heavy on her tongue. Chu nodded slowly. Then we must find a new way. What does the mountain itself tell you? Mira blinked. She had been so focused on her maps that she had forgotten to look at what was actually in front of her. She turned and really looked at the landscape, not comparing it to what she expected, but seeing it fresh. The snow had patterns that told stories if you knew how to read them. The rocks had colors that hinted at stability or danger. The wind carried information about what lay ahead. These were things she had learned long before she ever held a map, watching her mother move through the mountains with an attention that seemed almost magical. She put the maps away and began to walk slowly, reading the mountain as it was now, rather than as it had been. It was frightening at first, having no predetermined path to follow. Each step required fresh attention. She could not rely on memory or tradition. She had to actually see, actually feel, actually respond to what was here. She found herself moving differently than she ever had before. Usually she walked with confidence, knowing where she was going. Her body relaxed because her mind held the route clearly. Now, she moved like a child exploring an unfamiliar place, testing each step before committing her weight, pausing often to look and listen and feel. The snow spoke to her if she paid attention. Here it was packed firm by wind, safe to walk on. There it had a different sheen, suggesting hollow spaces beneath where she could fall through. The rocks had their own language too. Some were settled and stable, anchored in their places for centuries. Others were loose, ready to shift if she trusted them with her weight. She remembered her mother teaching her these things when she was very small, before she could read maps or understand words. Her mother would take her hand and guide her over the terrain, stopping to point at things without explaining, just showing. See this. Feel this. Notice this. At the time, it had seemed like play. Now Mira realized it had been the deepest teaching she had ever received. The group moved slowly. Sometimes Mira stopped for long minutes, sensing something she could not name, choosing not to proceed until she understood what the mountain was telling her. The travelers grew impatient at times, but old Chu would quiet them with a look. She is doing something more difficult than following a map, he told them. She is listening. There was one moment on the fourth day when Mira's new way of seeing may have saved all their lives. They were crossing a steep slope of snow that looked stable enough. The maps would have sent them straight across without hesitation. But something made Mira stop. She could not say what it was exactly. A quality of the light on the snow. A faint sound beneath her feet. An instinct rising from somewhere deeper than thought. We go around, she said, pointing to a longer route that would add an hour to their journey. The travelers protested. They were tired and cold. The snow looked fine. Why should they take the longer path? Mira could not explain. She only knew that something was wrong with the direct route, something her old certainty would have missed entirely. They took the longer path. And that evening, as they rested in a sheltered hollow, they heard the thunder of an avalanche behind them. It came from the slope they had not crossed, sweeping away everything in its path. If they had taken the direct route, they would have been caught in it. No one complained about the longer path after that. The journey that should have taken 4 days took 7. There were moments of real danger, routes that had to be abandoned, nights spent in inadequate shelter, when the safe caves could not be found. But they made it through, all of them, emerging into the valley beyond, tired but alive. When they reached the village on the other side, the travelers thanked Mira with relief and gratitude. She had saved them, they said. But Mira did not feel like a savior. She felt like someone who had been stripped of everything she thought she knew and had found something else in its place. Old Chu sought her out before departing. "You learned something on that mountain," he said. "I could see it happening." "I learned that my knowledge could fail me," Mira replied. "That everything I trusted could become useless in a moment. It was terrifying. And yet you found the way." "Yes, but only after I stopped trying to use what I knew. Only after I admitted that I did not know and started looking with fresh eyes." She paused, remembering the feeling of putting away her maps. It was like becoming a beginner again. I had to feel my way step by step, with nothing to rely on except what was right in front of me. Chu smiled. "That is the only place where real knowing lives. Not in maps or memories, but in direct contact with what is here now. Your maps were useful, but they were also a barrier. They showed you what was instead of what is. When you set them down, you could finally see. But how do I know when to trust the maps and when to trust my own seeing?" Mira asked. Chu considered this. "The maps are like an old friend who has been to these mountains before and wants to help you. You should listen to what they say, but you should also look with your own eyes. When what your friend tells you matches what you see, you can walk with confidence. But when the two disagree, trust what is actually in front of you. The map is a picture of the past. Only your own eyes can see the present." Mira thought about this for a long time after Chu left. She continued to guide travelers through the mountains in the years that followed. She still used maps, but she held them differently now. She knew they were pictures of the past, useful but incomplete. She knew that the mountains would keep changing and that her knowledge would need to change with them. She knew that the deepest guidance came not from what she had memorized, but from her willingness to see each journey fresh, to admit when she did not know, and to find the way by actually walking it. Sometimes, travelers asked her what made her such a skilled guide. She found it difficult to explain. It was not just her knowledge of the routes, though she knew them well. It was not just her physical ability, though years of climbing had made her strong. It was something harder to name, a quality of attention, a willingness to be uncertain, a trust in her own direct perception that went deeper than any map could reach. She taught this to the young guides who came to learn from her. "Carry your knowledge lightly," she told them. "It will help you, but it will also blind you if you trust it too much. The mountain is always new, even when it looks familiar. If you want to find the true path, you must be willing to not know. You must read what is here, not what you expect to be here. That is the only way through." Both of these stories show us different faces of the same truth. Win the teacher and Mira the guide both had to release their grip on what they thought they knew in order to find something more real. For Win, it was the admission that his book learning had not given him direct insight. For Mira, it was setting down her maps when they no longer matched the territory. The Buddha taught that clinging causes suffering, and this includes clinging to our ideas and beliefs. When we hold too tightly to what we think we know, we lose touch with what is actually here. Our knowledge becomes a screen between us and reality, showing us a picture of the past instead of the living present. The great doubt invites us to hold our knowledge more lightly, not to throw it away, but to remember that it is always partial, always incomplete. When we stay open to not knowing, we stay open to life itself. We can respond to what is actually here rather than reacting from old patterns and assumptions. This kind of not knowing is not ignorance. It is a deeper intelligence that stays awake and responsive. It is the wisdom of fresh eyes and open hands. It takes courage to stand in this place without the comfort of certainty. But it is here, in the willingness to not know, that real discovery becomes possible. Take a breath now and let yourself settle. You do not need to know anything in this moment. Simply rest here, open and at ease. Sometimes we choose to question our certainties. We read something that opens our minds, or we meet a teacher who invites us to look deeper. These are gentle awakenings, and we can approach them at our own pace. But sometimes, life itself shakes our foundations. Something happens that we did not expect and could not have prepared for. The ground we thought was solid turns out to be sand. The beliefs we trusted no longer hold. In these moments, we have no choice but to face the great doubt, whether we feel ready or not. These experiences can be painful. We may feel lost, confused, even betrayed by a world that no longer matches what we thought we knew. But Zen teaches that these moments of disruption, difficult as they are, can also be doorways. When our old certainties fall away, there is space for something new to emerge. When we can no longer rely on what we believed, we are finally free to see what is actually true. The Buddha himself began his journey this way. He was raised in comfort and certainty, protected from the difficult realities of life. But when he finally encountered old age, sickness, and death, his comfortable world collapsed. That collapse was not the end of his story. It was the beginning. The shattering of his illusions opened the door to a deeper inquiry that eventually led to his awakening. We may not be seeking enlightenment. We may simply be trying to get through our days. But when life shakes us, when our certainties crumble, we can remember that this is not only loss, it is also opportunity. The great doubt that arises in such moments is not a punishment. It is an invitation to look deeper, to question more honestly, to find ground that does not depend on things staying the same. Let us explore a story that shows how one woman found her way through such a shaking. In a seaside town where fishing boats went out each morning and returned each evening, there lived a woman named Sora who had built a good life. She was married to a kind man who worked as a boat builder. They had 2 children who were growing strong and healthy. Their home was modest but warm, filled with the sounds of family life. Sora had always believed that if you worked hard and lived honestly, life would treat you fairly. This belief had been confirmed by her experience. She and her husband had worked hard, and they had been rewarded with stability and comfort. She saw this pattern everywhere she looked. Good people prospered. Difficulties came to those who had earned them somehow. The world made sense. But in her 35th year, everything changed. Her husband, who had never been sick a day in his life, developed a sudden illness that no healer could explain. Within 3 months, he was gone. Sora found herself alone with 2 children to raise, a workshop to manage, and a heart so broken she wondered if it would ever mend. The loss was devastating, but what troubled her almost as much was what it did to her understanding of the world. Her husband had been a good man. He had worked hard. He had been kind to everyone he met. According to her beliefs, he should have lived a long and healthy life. His death made no sense. It violated everything she thought she knew about how the world worked. In the months that followed, Sora went through the motions of living. She cared for her children. She hired workers to keep the boat-building workshop running. She cooked meals and washed clothes and did all the things that needed to be done. But inside, she felt hollow. The world she had understood was gone, and she did not know how to live in the one that had taken its place. She would wake in the night, reaching for her husband and finding empty space. She would see something that would have made him laugh and turn to share it with him before remembering. These small moments of forgetting and remembering were perhaps the most painful of all, each one a fresh discovery of his absence. Her neighbors tried to comfort her with explanations. Perhaps her husband had done something wrong in a past life. Perhaps this was a test from the heavens. Perhaps there was a hidden purpose that would reveal itself in time. But none of these explanations helped. They all tried to make sense of something that refused to make sense, to fit her husband's death into a pattern that Sora no longer trusted. She even felt angry at the explanations, though she hid this from her well-meaning neighbors. Their words felt like attempts to tidy up something that should not be tidied, to put a frame around a wound that needed to breathe. She did not want her husband's death to make sense. Making sense of it felt like a betrayal, as if she were agreeing that it was acceptable, that it could be filed away and understood. One day, walking along the shore where she and her husband had walked so many times, Sora met an old woman sitting on the rocks, looking out at the sea. The woman's face was weathered by years of sun and wind, and her eyes held a calm that Sora envied deeply. "You are the widow of the boat builder," the old woman said. It was not a question. Sora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Sit with me for a while," the woman said, gesturing to a flat rock beside her. Sora sat. They watched the waves together in silence. The rhythm of the water was steady and unchanging, the same rhythm that had been washing against these shores since long before either of them was born. After a long while, the old woman spoke. "You are trying to understand why your husband died." "Yes," Sora admitted. "Everyone gives me reasons, but none of them feel true. He was a good man, did not deserve this. And you believed that good people are rewarded and bad people are punished." Sora felt tears rise. "I did believe that. I believed the world was fair. Now I do not know what to believe." The old woman nodded slowly. "That belief was comfortable. It made you feel safe. If you were good, nothing bad would happen to you. But it was never true. It was just a story you told yourself to feel secure." "Then what is true?" Sora asked, her voice breaking. "If the world is not fair, if good people suffer and bad people prosper, what is there to hold on to? That is the question, is it not?" The old woman turned to look at her directly. "Your certainty has been taken from you. That is painful. But it is also a gift, though I know it does not feel like one. How can this be a gift? Because now you can see more clearly. Your belief in fairness was like a colored glass you looked through. Everything you saw was tinted by it. You saw what confirmed your belief and ignored what did not. Now the glass is broken. You can see the world as it actually is, not as you wished it to be. Sora shook her head. I do not want to see the world as it is. The world as it is took my husband from me. Yes, the old woman agreed gently. The world as it is includes great loss. It includes pain that has no explanation. But it also includes beauty that has no explanation. It includes love that makes no sense, kindness that expects no reward, moments of grace that cannot be earned. When you let go of your need for the world to be fair, you can finally see all of it, the darkness and the light, without needing it to fit a pattern. They sat together until the sun began to set, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. The old woman said little more, and Sora found herself not needing words. There was something calming about simply sitting there, watching the waves, letting her broken beliefs rest without trying to fix them. In the weeks that followed, Sora found herself returning to those rocks often. Sometimes the old woman was there, sometimes not. When she was there, they would sit together in mostly silence. When she was not, Sora sat alone, watching the sea, letting her questions exist without demanding answers. Slowly, something began to shift in her. The hollow feeling did not go away entirely, but it began to change. It became less like emptiness and more like space. She stopped trying to understand why her husband had died. She stopped searching for explanations that would make it make sense. She simply let it be what it was, a loss that had no reason, a sorrow that could not be fixed. And strangely, as she stopped fighting the senselessness of it, something else became available to her. She began to notice moments of unexpected beauty in her days. The way her children laughed together in the morning, the smell of the sea on a clear day, the satisfaction of a problem solved in the workshop. These things had always been there, but she had been too busy making sense of the world to fully receive them. One evening, sitting on the rocks as the stars emerged, the old woman spoke again. You are different than when we first met. Sora considered this. I have stopped trying to understand. And what have you found? I am not sure how to say it. I used to think I knew how life worked. Now I know that I do not know. But somehow, not knowing feels more honest than my old certainty. My beliefs were a wall I hid behind. Now the wall is gone. I feel more exposed, but also more alive. The old woman smiled. The great doubt has done its work. It has taken away your false ground and left you standing on what is real. What is real? This moment. This breath. This mystery of being alive that cannot be explained or controlled. When we stop demanding that life makes sense, we can finally meet it as it is. And what it is far stranger and more wonderful than any of our ideas about it. Sora continued to live in the seaside town, raising her children, running the workshop her husband had left behind. She never remarried, though she was not opposed to it. She simply found that she was content with her life as it was. The loss of her husband remained a sorrow she carried, but it was no longer a wound that needed to be healed. It was simply part of her story, part of the mystery she had learned to accept. When others came to her in their own times of loss and confusion, she did not offer explanations. She did not try to make their pain make sense. She simply sat with them, as the old woman had sat with her, letting them feel what they needed to feel without rushing toward understanding. Life does not owe us explanations, she would tell them. We want things to make sense because it makes us feel safe. But real safety does not come from understanding. It comes from being present with what is, even when what is breaks our hearts. This story shows us how life itself can become a teacher of the great doubt. Sora did not choose to question her beliefs. Her beliefs were shattered by circumstances beyond her control. But in the wreckage of her certainty, she found something more real than what she had lost. Zen teaches that our ideas about life are not the same as life itself. We build mental models of how things work, and these models can be useful, but they are always incomplete, always partial, always missing something essential. When life disrupts our models, we have a choice. We can try to rebuild them, patching the holes with new explanations, or we can let them go and meet life directly, without the buffer of our concepts. This is not easy. Our beliefs give us comfort. They make us feel that we understand, that we have some control, that the world is predictable and safe. When they fall away, we feel exposed and vulnerable. But this vulnerability is also an opening. It is a doorway into a more direct relationship with reality, one that does not depend on things making sense. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from clinging, and one of the things we cling to most tightly is our understanding. We want to know why things happen. We want life to follow rules we can learn and apply. When it refuses to cooperate, we suffer. But when we can release our grip on understanding, when we can allow things to be mysterious, something relaxes in us. We stop fighting against the unknown and start learning to live with it. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a region known for its fine silk, there lived a merchant named Bowen, who had spent his life building a trading business. He had started with nothing, working as a boy carrying bolts of fabric for other merchants. Through hard work and clever decisions, he had risen to become one of the most successful traders in the region. He owned warehouses full of silk. He employed dozens of workers. He was respected by all who knew him. Bowen believed in himself and his abilities. He had proven over and over that he could overcome any obstacle, solve any problem, turn any situation to his advantage. This confidence had served him well. It had given him the courage to take risks that others avoided, to persist when others gave up, to build something from nothing through sheer force of will. But in his 50th year, a series of misfortunes struck that even Bowen could not overcome. A fire destroyed his largest warehouse, taking most of his inventory with it. A ship carrying a valuable cargo sank in a storm. Several of his most trusted workers left to start their own competing business, taking key customers with them. One disaster followed another, and within 2 years, almost everything Bowen had built was gone. He tried to recover. He applied all his skill and determination, working harder than he had worked even in his youth. But nothing he did seemed to help. Deals fell through. It was as if the world had turned against him. Bowen could not understand what was happening. He had always believed that success came to those who worked for it, that intelligence and effort would be rewarded. He had built his entire identity on this belief. Now that identity was crumbling along with his business. He found himself walking one day through the countryside outside the city, not knowing where he was going, just needing to move. He came to a small temple he had passed many times but never entered. On an impulse, he went inside. The temple was quiet and cool, lit by a few candles. An old monk was sweeping the floor with slow, deliberate movements. He looked up when Bowen entered and nodded a greeting. Bowen sat down on a bench, suddenly very tired. The monk finished his sweeping and came to sit nearby. "You look like a man who has lost something," the monk observed. Bowen laughed bitterly. "I have lost everything. My business, my wealth, my reputation. Everything I spent my life building. That is a great loss. I do not understand how it happened. I did everything right. I worked hard. I made smart decisions. I should have succeeded. I always succeeded before." The monk was quiet for a moment. "You believed that your efforts controlled the outcome, that if you did the right things, you would get the right results." "Yes, that is how the world works. That is how I built everything I had. And now," Bowen spread his hands helplessly, "now I do not know. Nothing I do makes any difference. It is as if the rules I lived by no longer apply." The monk nodded slowly. "Perhaps they never applied quite the way you thought they did. You worked hard and succeeded, and you believed the success came from the work. But perhaps there were other factors you did not see. Luck, timing, help from others. Circumstances beyond your control that happened to favor you. You took credit for it all, believing it was your doing. Now the same unseen factors work against you, and you are confused because you thought you were in charge." Bowen felt resistance rise in him. "So you are saying my success was not mine, that I did not earn what I achieved. I am saying that it is more complicated than you believed. You worked hard, yes. That mattered. But it was not the only thing that mattered. Many people work hard and do not succeed. Many foolish people prosper through luck alone. The relationship between effort and outcome is not as simple as you thought. Then what is the point of trying? If success does not depend on effort, why work at all?" The monk smiled gently. "I did not say effort does not matter. I said it is not the only thing that matters. We do what we can, and then we must accept what comes. The mistake is believing that we control more than we do. When we succeed, we take all the credit. When we fail, we cannot understand why. Both responses come from the same illusion, the illusion that we are in charge." Bowen sat with this for a long time. The temple was quiet except for the sound of birds outside. The monk did not rush him or add more words. He simply waited. The candles flickered in a breeze that came from somewhere, casting moving shadows on the walls. Bowen watched them dance and thought about all the times he had felt in control of his life. Had he ever really been in control? Or had he just been fortunate enough that circumstances aligned with his efforts? He remembered deals that had succeeded because a competitor fell ill at the right moment. He remembered storms that had delayed rival ships, allowing his goods to reach market first. At the time, he had barely noticed these factors. He had been too busy congratulating himself on his own cleverness. Finally, Bowen spoke. "If I am not in charge, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live? You do your best, and you hold the results lightly. You make your plans, but you do not demand that they succeed. You work with what life gives you instead of insisting it give you what you want. This is not defeat. It is wisdom. It is learning to dance with life instead of trying to control it." I do not know how to do that, Bowen admitted. I have spent my whole life trying to control things. It is all I know. Then you have an opportunity to learn something new, the monk said gently. Your old way has been taken from you. That is painful, but it is also a kind of freedom. You no longer have to carry the weight of believing you control everything. You can set that burden down. It does not feel like freedom. It feels like failure. Give it time. What feels like failure now may come to feel like relief. The need to control is exhausting. You have been working hard your whole life, not just at your business, but at the impossible task of making life behave the way you wanted. Now you can finally rest from that effort. You can do what is in front of you without the weight of believing it all depends on you. In the months that followed, Bowen returned to the temple often. He did not become a monk, but he found something in those quiet visits that helped him through his difficulties. Slowly, he began to rebuild, but differently this time. He started smaller. He worked with fewer expectations. When things went well, he was grateful rather than proud. When things went poorly, he adjusted rather than raged. He never regained what he had lost. His new business was modest compared to his old empire, but he found something else, a kind of peace that had been missing even in his most successful years. He no longer carried the weight of believing he had to control everything. He no longer felt that his worth depended on his achievements. He could enjoy his work without being enslaved by it. His workers noticed the change in him. The old Bowen had been demanding and driven, always pushing for more, never satisfied. The new Bowen was calmer, more patient. He praised good work and accepted setbacks without the anger that had once been his response to anything that went wrong. Some said he had grown soft. Others said he had finally grown up. His children, who had barely known him when he was building his empire, now had a father who was present. He ate meals with them. He listened to their concerns. He told them about his failures as honestly as he had once boasted of his successes. They learned from him that life did not always reward effort, that circumstances mattered as much as skill, and that a person's worth was not measured by their achievements alone. I used to think I knew how the world worked, he told the old monk one day. I had it all figured out. Success came from effort. Results came from skill. I was the master of my fate. And now I know that I know very little. The world is more mysterious than I imagined. Things happen for reasons I cannot see. I do my best, and then I let go. It is a strange way to live, after so many years of trying to control everything. But it is also a relief. The monk nodded. The great doubt has humbled you. It has shown you the limits of your understanding. This is not a loss, though it may feel like one. It is the beginning of a wiser way to live. Both Sora and Bowen had their certainties stripped away by circumstances they did not choose, and both found, in the wreckage of what they had believed, a more honest relationship with life. Their stories remind us that the great doubt is not always something we seek. Sometimes it finds us, breaking through our defenses, whether we are ready or not. Zen does not promise that life will be easy or that understanding will make it so. What it offers instead is a way of meeting difficulty that does not depend on things making sense. When we can sit with what we do not understand, when we can accept mystery instead of demanding explanations, We find a ground that cannot be shaken because it does not require certainty in the first place. Take a breath now and let your body soften. Whatever you think you know or do not know, this moment is simply here, asking nothing of you. We have been exploring the great doubt from many angles tonight. We have seen how certainty can become a prison, how questions can open doors that answers never could, how the courage to not know brings us closer to what is real. We have witnessed what happens when life itself shakes our foundations and invites us into deeper inquiry. Now we come to something even more simple and profound. What if the question itself is the path? What if the seeking is not a means to an end, but the very thing we are looking for? We usually think of questions as problems to be solved. We ask because we want to know. We seek because we want to find. The question is uncomfortable, and the answer brings relief. This is how we learn to relate to not knowing from our earliest years. Not knowing is a problem. Knowing is the solution. But Zen points to another possibility. Some questions are not meant to be answered. They are meant to be lived. When we stop trying to solve them and start letting them guide us, something shifts. The question becomes a companion rather than an obstacle. The seeking becomes a way of being rather than a task to complete. This is the deeper teaching of the great doubt. It is not about finding the right answers. It is about developing a certain quality of attention, a willingness to stay open and wondering, a trust in the inquiry itself. When we live this way, each moment becomes fresh. Each experience becomes an invitation to look deeper. We are no longer rushing toward conclusions. We are present with the mystery as it unfolds. Let us explore a story that shows how one seeker discovered this truth. In a valley where cherry trees bloomed each spring with breathtaking beauty, there lived a young man named Koji, who had been searching for peace his entire adult life. He had tried many things. He had studied with teachers who promised answers. He had practiced disciplines that were supposed to bring enlightenment. He had read countless books and traveled to distant places seeking wisdom. But peace remained just out of reach, like a butterfly that flew away each time he tried to grasp it. Koji was not lazy or insincere. He worked hard at his seeking. He followed instructions carefully. He gave himself fully to each path he tried. But sooner or later, each path disappointed him. The answers he found did not satisfy. The practices he mastered did not bring the peace they promised. Something was always missing. By the time he was 35, Koji was exhausted and discouraged. He had spent half his life seeking and had nothing to show for it. He began to wonder if peace was even possible, or if it was just a dream that some people chased forever without ever catching. One autumn, he heard about an old teacher named Master Ling, who lived alone in the mountains. People said she was different from other teachers. She did not promise answers or teach techniques. People who visited her often came back changed, though they could rarely explain how or why. Koji decided to make one last attempt. If this teacher could not help him, he would give up seeking altogether and simply live out his days as best he could. The journey to Master Ling's hut took 3 days. The path wound through forests of pine and bamboo, crossing streams and climbing ridges. By the time Koji arrived, he was tired in body and spirit. He found the teacher sitting outside her small hut, watching the clouds drift across the mountain peaks. She was very old, her face lined like the bark of an ancient tree. But her eyes were bright and clear, and she looked at Koji with an attention that made him feel truly seen. "You have been seeking for a long time," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Koji admitted. "I have tried everything. I have followed many paths, but I have not found what I am looking for." "What are you looking for?" "Peace. An end to the restlessness that has driven me all these years. A place to finally rest." Master Ling nodded slowly. "And you believe that when you find the right answer, the right teaching, the right practice, you will finally have peace?" "Yes, that is what I have always believed. That is why I keep seeking." "What if that belief is the very thing that prevents you from finding what you seek?" Koji frowned. "I do not understand." Master Ling gestured for him to sit on a rock nearby. "You have been treating your seeking as a problem to be solved. You are looking for the answer that will end the seeking. But what if seeking is not a problem? What if the seeking itself is the path? But I am tired of seeking. I want to arrive somewhere. I want to stop." "I understand, but consider this. Every time you thought you had arrived, you discovered you had not. Every answer you found eventually revealed itself as incomplete. Every destination turned out to be another starting point. Perhaps this is not failure. Perhaps this is how it is meant to be." She picked up a small stone and held it in her palm. "You have been grasping for answers the way you might grasp for this stone. You reach out, you grab, you hold tight. But peace is not a stone. It cannot be grasped. The moment you try to hold it, it slips away. Then what am I supposed to do? Stop trying to arrive. Stop looking for the answer that will end your questions. Instead, let the questions themselves become your path. Walk with them. Live with them. Let them guide you without demanding that they lead somewhere." Koji felt frustrated. That sounds like giving up. Like accepting that I will never find what I am looking for. It may sound that way, but it is actually something different. When you stop demanding answers, you become available to something deeper than answers. You become present with life as it actually is, rather than rushing past it towards some imagined destination. This presence, this willingness to be here without needing to be somewhere else, is closer to peace than any answer could ever bring. Koji stayed with Master Ling for several weeks. She did not teach him techniques or give him practices to follow. She simply lived her life and allowed him to be part of it. They gathered firewood together. They cooked simple meals. They sat in silence watching the clouds and the birds and the changing light. At first, Koji was impatient. He kept waiting for the real teaching to begin. Surely there was something more than this, some secret she would reveal when he was ready. But the days passed, and nothing special happened. There was just ordinary life, moment after moment, without any dramatic revelations. He tried to ask questions, to draw out the wisdom he was sure she was hiding. But Master Ling would only give simple answers and return to whatever task was at hand. When he asked about enlightenment, she would say, "Hand me that pot." When he asked about the nature of mind, she would say, "The beans need more water." At first, this frustrated him. He had come all this way for wisdom, not cooking lessons. But slowly, he began to notice something. In those moments when he stopped seeking and simply did what needed to be done, something relaxed in him. The restlessness that had driven him for so long would quiet, just for a moment, like a lake becoming still. He started paying more attention to these moments. They happened most often when his hands were busy and his mind had nothing to grasp at. Chopping vegetables, sweeping the floor, carrying water from the stream. In these simple activities, there was nothing to figure out, nothing to achieve. There was just this action, this moment, complete in itself. And yet, something began to shift in him. The restlessness that had driven him for so long began to quiet. Not because he had found an answer, but because he had stopped demanding one. He was simply here, chopping wood, carrying water, watching clouds. The questions he had carried for so long were still there, but they no longer felt like burdens. They felt more like companions, walking beside him through his days. One evening, sitting with Master Ling as the stars emerged, Koji tried to put words to what he was experiencing. "I have not found the answer I was looking for," he said. "But somehow that no longer seems to matter. The question is still here, but it feels different. It feels like part of me, rather than a problem I need to solve." Master Ling smiled. "You are beginning to understand. The question was never your enemy. It was your seeking that made you suffer, not your not knowing. When you stop fighting against not knowing, when you let the question be what it is without demanding it go away, something opens. You find that you can live with uncertainty. You find that peace does not require answers. But what about all those years I spent seeking? Were they wasted? Nothing is wasted. Your seeking brought you here. Your exhaustion with seeking opened you to something new. Even the paths that disappointed you taught you something, if only that they were not what you needed. The journey is never wasted, even when it does not lead where we expected." Koji thought about this. He remembered all the teachers he had studied with, all the practices he had tried, all the books he had read. At the time, each disappointment had felt like failure. But now he could see that each one had been necessary. Each one had stripped away something false, had shown him what peace was not, had prepared him for this moment of finally letting go. "So the seeking was the path all along," he said slowly. "I thought I was trying to get somewhere. But the trying itself was where I needed to be." "Yes, but you could not see that while you were demanding a destination. You had to exhaust yourself, had to give up hope of arriving before you could recognize that you had never really left. The peace you were seeking was always here, hidden beneath your seeking." When Koji finally left the mountain, he did not feel that he had found what he had been looking for. But he also did not feel that he needed to keep looking. The question that had driven him all those years was still present, but it had transformed from a burden into a gift. It kept him awake, kept him wondering, kept him present with the mystery of being alive. He returned to ordinary life, but he lived it differently now. He no longer rushed past each moment trying to get somewhere else. He no longer evaluated each experience by whether it brought him closer to his goal. He simply lived, day by day, with his questions as companions rather than problems. Years later, when people asked him if he had found peace, he would smile and say, "I stopped looking for it. And then I realized it had been here all along, hidden beneath all my seeking." This story shows us something essential about the great doubt. Koji spent years treating his questions as obstacles to overcome, problems to solve, burdens to set down. It was only when he stopped fighting against them that he found what he was looking for. We have seen this pattern throughout our exploration tonight. Jiro, the scholar, found freedom not by learning more, but by admitting he did not know. Hana the potter rediscovered her art by letting go of her mastery and wondering again. Mira the guide found her way when her maps failed, and she had to see with fresh eyes. Sora found peace not by understanding her husband's death, but by accepting that it could not be understood. In each case, the turning point came not from finding answers, but from releasing the demand for them. The great doubt is not about becoming more confused or giving up on truth. It is about changing our relationship with not knowing. When we can hold our questions lightly, when we can let them be present without needing them to be resolved, something shifts. We stop struggling against uncertainty and start living with it. We discover that the ground we were seeking was never far away. It was just hidden beneath our frantic searching. Zen teaches that the path and the goal are not separate. We think we must walk the path in order to reach the goal, as if they were two different things. But the walking itself is what we are looking for. The questioning itself is the answer. When we understand this, we can finally relax. We are not trying to get somewhere else. We are learning to be fully here, with all our questions, all our uncertainty, all our not knowing. This is the peace that does not depend on anything being different than it is. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a town famous for its gardens, there lived a gardener named Emmy, who had tended the same plot of land for 50 years. She had begun as a young woman, learning from her grandmother how to coax beauty from soil and seed. Over the decades, she had created something remarkable, a garden that drew visitors from distant places who wanted to see what she had grown. But Emmy's garden was never finished. This was what made it different from other famous gardens, which were designed and completed and then maintained in their perfect state. Emmy's garden was always changing, always becoming, never arriving at a final form. Each season, she would tear out something that had been there for years and plant something new. Paths that had wound one direction would shift to wind another. Trees that had anchored certain views would be removed to reveal different ones. Visitors, who returned after several years, often could not recognize where they were. So much had changed. Some people criticized this. They said a true gardener would create a masterpiece and then preserve it. They said all this change showed a lack of vision, an inability to commit to a design. But Emmy only smiled at these criticisms. She had long ago stopped caring what others thought of her methods. A young gardener named Shin came to study with her one spring. He had trained in the traditional way, learning to create perfect compositions that would stand unchanged for generations. He admired Emmy's skill but was troubled by her approach. "Teacher," he said one day as they worked together transplanting seedlings, "why do you keep changing everything? Last year you had a beautiful arrangement of stones by the eastern pond. Now they are gone. Did you not like them anymore?" Emmy patted soil around a young plant before answering. "I liked them very much. That is not why I moved them." "Then why?" "Because the garden was becoming fixed. It was starting to feel like a finished thing rather than a living thing. When I looked at those stones, I no longer really saw them. They had become familiar, expected. By moving them, I could see the space fresh again." Shin frowned. "But is the goal not to create something perfect? Something that does not need to change? Emmy sat back on her heels and looked at the young man. That is what I was taught too when I was your age. I spent many years trying to create the perfect garden, the arrangement that would be complete and final. But I always failed. No matter what I did, I would look at it and see something that could be different, something that was not quite right. So you gave up on perfection? No. I discovered that perfection is not a destination. It is not a place you arrive and then stop. Perfection is in the seeking itself, in the constant attention, the endless willingness to see and respond. The garden is most alive when it is changing. When it becomes fixed, something dies in it, even if it looks beautiful to visitors who do not know any better. She stood and brushed dirt from her knees. Come, I will show you something. She led him to a corner of the garden that was wild and unplanned, a tangle of plants that seemed to have grown without any guidance. Shin had noticed this area before and assumed it was a section Emmy had neglected or not yet gotten to. This is my favorite part of the garden, Emmy said. Shin looked at the chaos of leaves and flowers and vines. But it has no design. It is just random growth. Yes, and it is the most alive corner of the entire garden. I do not plan it. I do not shape it. I simply let it grow and watch what happens. It teaches me more than all my careful arrangements. What does it teach you? Emmy was quiet for a moment, watching a bee move from flower to flower. It teaches me that life does not need my control to be beautiful. It teaches me that there is wisdom in things I did not plan. It teaches me to stay humble, to keep questioning, to never assume I know best. She turned to face Shin directly. You want to create the perfect garden. That desire will drive you to do excellent work. But if you cling to it too tightly, it will also make you suffer. You will never be satisfied. You will always see flaws. The goal will always be just out of reach. What is the alternative? Fall in love with the gardening itself, not the garden. Let the process be the point. When you are planting, just plant. When you are pruning, just prune. When you are standing back looking at what you have done, really look with fresh eyes, as if you had never seen it before. The garden will never be perfect, but the gardening can be complete in each moment, if you give yourself fully to it. Shin stayed with Emmy for 3 years. He learned techniques and principles, but more importantly, he learned a way of being with his work. He stopped trying to arrive at a final result and started attending to each moment of the process. He stopped judging his garden against an imaginary ideal and started really seeing what was actually there. There were difficult moments in this learning. Shin would create something beautiful, something he was proud of, and Emmy would suggest changing it. At first he resisted. Why tear down what was working? Why disturb what was good? But Emmy was patient and persistent. Your attachment to what you have made is blinding you, she told him once. You cannot see this corner of the garden anymore because you have decided it is finished. But nothing is ever finished. When you believe it is, you stop seeing. You stop wondering. You stop being a gardener and become a guard, protecting what is, rather than discovering what could be. Slowly, Shin began to understand. He practiced letting go of his creations, not because they were bad, but because the letting go itself was part of the practice. Each time he released something he had made, he felt a brief pain followed by a surprising freedom. His eyes would open to possibilities he had not seen before. The garden would become new again. He also spent many hours in the wild corner, the untended space that Emmy loved so much. At first he only observed, watching how the plants competed and cooperated, how some thrived and others faded, how the whole system found its own balance without any guidance from him. But gradually, he began to feel something deeper, a kind of trust in the process of life itself, a willingness to let things unfold without needing to control them. When he finally left to create his own garden, Emmy gave him a single seed as a parting gift. "Plant this," she said, "and watch it grow. Do not plan what you want it to become. Let it show you. Let it teach you. And when it is fully grown, consider removing it and planting something else. The garden is not the point. The gardening is the point. Never forget that." Years later, Shin's garden became famous in its own right. Visitors noticed something unusual about it. Like Emmy's, it was always changing, always becoming, never fixed in a final form. And like Emmy's, it had a wild corner where nature was allowed to do as it pleased. When people asked Shin about his approach, he would tell them about his teacher and the seed she had given him. "She taught me that the question is the path," he would say. "I am always asking what this garden wants to become. I will never have a final answer. And that is exactly as it should be." Both Koji and Emmy discovered the same truth from different directions. Koji learned that his spiritual seeking was not a problem to be solved, but a way of being to embrace. Emmy learned that her gardening was not a means to an end, but an end in itself. For both of them, the shift came when they stopped rushing toward completion and started appreciating the journey itself. This is what the great doubt looks like when it matures into wisdom. The questions do not go away. The seeking does not end, but our relationship with them transforms completely. We are no longer burdened by what we do not know. We are enriched by it. Each question becomes an invitation to look deeper. Each moment of not knowing becomes an opportunity to see fresh. We can see how this connects to everything we have explored tonight. The scholar Jiro had to admit he did not know before wisdom could find him. The farmer Taro had to sit with his question without answering it before something opened. When we stop treating our not knowing as a problem, it becomes a doorway. When we stop fighting against uncertainty, it becomes a companion. The Buddha taught that clinging causes suffering, and this includes clinging to goals and destinations. When we demand that our journey take us somewhere, when we measure each step by how much closer it brings us to arrival, we miss the step itself. But when we can release this demand, when we can let each moment be complete in itself, we discover a peace that does not depend on getting anywhere at all. This is perhaps the deepest teaching of the great doubt. Not that we should doubt everything and trust nothing, but that we should hold our questions with love rather than frustration. Our not knowing is not a failure. It is what keeps us alive, curious, open to what each moment might bring. The question is not an obstacle on the path. The question is the path itself. Take a slow breath and feel yourself here, present in this moment. The questions can rest beside you like old friends, asking nothing, offering their quiet company. We have traveled far together tonight, exploring the great doubt from many perspectives. Now we come to something that ties all of this together. What does it look like to live with the great doubt as a continuous way of being? Not as a crisis to move through, not as a practice we do sometimes, but as a quality of attention we bring to every moment of our lives. The word for this is wonder. Not the wonder of amazement at something spectacular, though that is part of it. A deeper kind of wonder that finds the extraordinary in the ordinary, that looks at familiar things with fresh eyes, that never quite stops asking what this is and what it means. Children know this wonder naturally. They look at the world with eyes that have not yet decided what everything is. A stone is not just a stone to a child. It is a mystery, a treasure, something to turn over and examine and ask questions about. But as we grow older, we learn to label things and move on. We think we know what a stone is, so we stop really seeing it. The wonder fades as our certainties accumulate. The great doubt invites us to recover this wonder, not by forgetting what we have learned, but by holding it lightly enough that we can still be surprised. It invites us to approach each day, each moment, each encounter, as if we had never quite seen it before. Because in truth, we have not. Each moment is new, even when it looks like moments we have seen before. Let us explore a story that shows how one man discovered this way of living. In a village at the foot of a great mountain, there lived an old man named Goro, who was known for his unusual way of being in the world. He had lived in the village his entire life, over 80 years, and had never traveled more than a day's walk from where he was born. Yet visitors who met him often remarked that he seemed more awake, more present, more alive than people who had seen the whole world. Goro had been a woodcutter in his younger days, and then a carpenter, and then a simple handyman who helped neighbors with whatever needed doing. He had no special education, no training in philosophy or meditation. He had simply lived his life in this small village, doing ordinary things, day after day, year after year. But there was something different about how he did these ordinary things. When Goro looked at you, you felt truly seen. When he listened, you felt truly heard. When he picked up a piece of wood or touched the bark of a tree, there was a quality of attention in his hands that made you want to watch. He moved through the world as if everything in it was interesting, as if he had never quite figured it all out. A young woman named Nori had grown up watching Goro and wondering about him. She had always been restless, hungry for something more than village life could offer. She dreamed of traveling to distant cities, of having adventures, of learning great things from famous teachers. The village felt small and dull to her, the same faces and the same routines day after day. But whenever she encountered old Goro, she felt something she could not explain. A kind of stillness came over her in his presence. The restlessness would quiet just for a moment, and she would wonder what he knew that she did not. One autumn morning, she found him sitting on a bench outside his small house, watching the leaves fall from a maple tree. She had walked past this tree 1,000 times without really noticing it. But Goro was watching it as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. She sat down beside him. For a while, they watched the leaves together in silence. Each one drifted down in its own way, spinning and floating, catching the light as it fell. "I am leaving the village soon," Nori said finally. "I'm going to the capital to study. I want to learn things, see things, become someone more than I am here." Goro nodded slowly, his eyes still on the falling leaves. That is good. Travel teaches many things, but I wonder sometimes if I will find what I am looking for. I have this feeling that something important is missing, and I think if I go far enough, learn enough, I will find it. Goro was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have never traveled far. I have lived my whole life within sight of that mountain, and yet I have never run out of things to discover. Nori looked at him curiously. How is that possible? You have seen the same things every day for 80 years. How can there still be anything new? Because I have never stopped wondering about them. He gestured toward the maple tree. I have watched this tree for 60 years. I planted it when I was a young man. You might think I would know everything about it by now. But every autumn, when the leaves begin to change, I find myself amazed all over again. How does it know when to let go? Where do those colors come from? What is it like to be a tree, standing in one place for a lifetime, reaching toward the sun? He turned to look at her directly. These questions have no answers. Or rather, any answer I might give would be too small, would not capture the reality of what I am seeing. So I just keep wondering. And the wondering keeps everything fresh. Nori frowned slightly. But that sounds exhausting. To always be questioning, never settling into knowing. It is not exhausting at all. What is exhausting is pretending to know things you do not really know. What is exhausting is defending your certainties against a world that keeps showing you something different. When you stop pretending to know, when you let yourself wonder, something relaxes. You do not have to figure everything out. You can just be here, curious, open, alive. He picked up a fallen leaf and held it gently in his weathered hands. This leaf, I could tell you many things about it. I could name its parts, explain how it grows, describe the process by which it changes color and falls. That knowledge is not wrong, but it is not the whole truth either. The whole truth is bigger than any explanation. When I hold this leaf and really look at it, I touch something my words cannot capture. That is what keeps me wondering after all these years. Nori took the leaf from his hands and looked at it. It was beautiful, she realized, in a way she had never noticed before. The colors were not just red and orange, but 100 subtle shades blending into each other. The veins formed patterns that were almost like rivers seen from a great height. There was a whole world in this single leaf that she had been walking past her entire life. I see what you mean, she said softly. I have looked at leaves 1,000 times without ever really seeing them. That is how it is for most people, Goro said gently. We learn the names of things and think we know them. We put them in categories and move on. But the names are not the things. The categories are not the reality. When we can set aside what we think we know and look with fresh eyes, everything becomes new again. How do you do it? Nori asked. How do you keep wondering after so many years? I would think the newness would wear off eventually. Goro considered the question. It is not something I do, exactly. It is more like something I stop doing. Most people are constantly telling themselves what things are. They see a tree and immediately their mind says tree and moves on. They see a person and their mind says neighbor or stranger and moves on. This labeling happens so fast, so automatically, that we do not notice we are doing it. But every time we label something, we stop seeing it. We see only our idea of it. He paused, watching another leaf drift down from the maple. When I was younger, I did this too. I rushed through my days, putting everything in boxes, thinking I understood what I was seeing. But then something happened. I was working one day, cutting a piece of wood, and I suddenly really saw the grain of the wood. The patterns, the colors, the way the light played across the surface. I had cut thousands of pieces of wood before, but in that moment, it was as if I had never seen wood in my life. What happened? I do not know exactly. Some wall fell away. Some habit of not seeing loosened its grip. And after that, I started noticing how much I had been missing. The world had always been full of wonders. I had just been too busy naming them to notice. Nori did leave for the capital, as she had planned. She studied with teachers and read books and saw many things she had never seen before. The world was vast and various, and she was glad she had traveled. But something Goro had shown her stayed with her through all her journeys. She found herself looking at things differently, questioning her certainties, wondering about what she thought she knew. The great monuments of the capital were impressive, but so was a single leaf when she really looked at it. The famous teachers had much to share, but so did an old man who had never left his village. Years later, when she returned home, she went to visit Goro. He was very old now, rarely leaving his house, but his eyes were still bright with that same quality of attention she remembered. "I traveled far," she told him. "I learned many things, but the most important thing I learned was something you showed me before I left." "What was that?" "That wonder is not about how far you go or how much you see. It is about how you look at whatever is in front of you. I could travel the whole world and still miss everything if I thought I already knew what I was seeing. Or I could stay in one place my whole life and never run out of discoveries if I kept wondering." She paused, remembering all the places she had been, all the things she had seen. The great temples and busy markets, the mountains and rivers and foreign faces. They had been wonders, every one of them. But so had the maple tree in front of Goro's house. So had the familiar streets of her village. The wonder had not been in the places. It had been in her way of seeing. "I used to think this village was too small for me," she continued. "I thought I needed to go somewhere bigger, somewhere more exciting. But now I see that no place is small if you really look at it. And no place is big enough if you are not really looking." Goro smiled, that gentle smile she remembered from childhood. "You have learned well. The world is infinite, not because it is large, but because it cannot be exhausted by our understanding. Every leaf, every stone, every face contains more than we can ever fully know. When we remember this, we can never be bored. We can never run out of things to discover. The wonder never ends." This story shows us what it looks like to live with the great doubt as a way of being. Goro had not achieved anything special. He had not attained enlightenment or gained secret knowledge. He had simply never stopped wondering about the world around him. His questions kept everything fresh, even after 80 years of seeing the same village, the same mountain, the same trees. We have seen throughout our exploration tonight how the great doubt can transform our relationship with not knowing. The scholar Jiro found freedom when he admitted the limits of his learning. The potter Hana rediscovered her art when she approached her clay with fresh questions. The widow Sora found peace when she stopped demanding that her loss make sense. The seeker Koji found rest when he stopped trying to arrive and let the journey be enough. What Goro shows us is that this transformation does not have to be a one-time event. It can become a way of living, a continuous openness to wonder that colors every moment of our days. The great doubt is not something we practice only in crisis or meditation. It can be present in how we look at a falling leaf, how we listen to a friend, how we taste our food, how we feel the air on our skin. Zen teaches that enlightenment is not a destination, but a way of seeing. It is not something we achieve once and then possess forever. It is something we practice moment by moment, staying awake to the freshness of each experience, releasing our grip on what we think we know. When we live this way, ordinary life becomes extraordinary. The familiar becomes mysterious again. We discover that we have been walking through a world of wonders all along, too busy with our certainties to notice. Let us explore another story that reveals more of this teaching. In a town known for its school, there lived a teacher named Master Shu, who had an unusual way of instructing his students. Where other teachers gave lectures and explanations, Master Shu asked questions. Where others provided answers, he offered more questions. Some students found this frustrating. Others found it liberating. Shu had been teaching for over 30 years. He had begun in the traditional way, filling his students with knowledge, testing them on what they had memorized, measuring their progress by how many right answers they could give. He had been good at this kind of teaching, and his students had done well by the usual measures. But somewhere along the way, he had begun to feel that something was missing. His students could recite facts and repeat arguments, but there was a deadness in their eyes when they did so. They were not really thinking. They were just retrieving information he had stored in their minds. The knowledge had not come alive in them. He started experimenting with a different approach. Instead of telling students what to think, he began asking them questions that made them think for themselves. Instead of giving answers, he would respond to their answers with more questions, pushing them deeper, helping them discover the limits of what they thought they knew. At first, many students resisted. They wanted to be told the right answers. They wanted to memorize and move on. The constant questioning made them uncomfortable. But those who stayed with it began to change. Their eyes came alive. They started thinking instead of just remembering. They discovered that learning was not about collecting answers, but about deepening questions. A young man named Haru came to study with Master Shu, hoping to gain knowledge that would help him succeed in life. He was ambitious and clever, quick to grasp ideas and eager to show what he knew. He expected to impress his teacher with his intelligence. But Master Shu did not seem interested in being impressed. When Haru gave clever answers, the teacher would simply ask another question. When Haru displayed his knowledge, Shu would probe until he found the edges of that knowledge, the places where certainty gave way to confusion. "Why do you keep questioning me?" Haru asked one day, frustrated. "I gave you the correct answer." "Why is that not enough?" Master Shu smiled gently. "The correct answer is like a door that is closed. It ends the inquiry. But I am not interested in ending your inquiry. I am interested in opening it wider. But what is the point of learning if not to find the right answers? The point of learning is to become more alive, to see more clearly, to think more deeply. Answers can help with this, but they can also hinder. When you believe you have the right answer, you stop looking. You close the door. The world becomes smaller. He picked up a brush and drew a circle on a piece of paper. This circle represents what you know. Everything inside is familiar territory. You have explored it, mapped it, understood it. But look at the edge of the circle. That edge is where your knowledge meets your ignorance. And here is something interesting. The bigger the circle grows, the longer the edge becomes. The more you know, the more you discover how much you do not know. Haru looked at the circle. He had never thought of it this way. He had always imagined that learning meant shrinking the territory of ignorance, replacing not knowing with knowing. But what Master Shu was showing him was different. Learning expanded your awareness of how much remained unknown. So we can never know everything, Haru said slowly. No, and that is not a failure. That is what keeps us humble. That is what keeps us curious. That is what keeps us alive. The moment you think you know everything worth knowing, you have stopped growing. You have become a closed door instead of an open one. Over the months that followed, Haru's relationship with learning transformed. He stopped trying to accumulate answers and started cultivating questions. He found that the best questions were the ones that could not be easily answered, the ones that opened up new territory for exploration. These questions became more valuable to him than any answers he had collected before. He also noticed something changing in how he moved through the world. He had always been quick to judge, quick to categorize, quick to decide what things were and how they worked. Now he found himself pausing more often, looking more carefully, wondering about things he would have dismissed before. One evening, walking home from his studies, he stopped to watch the sunset. He had seen hundreds of sunsets in his life and had never given them much thought. They were just something that happened at the end of each day. But now he found himself genuinely wondering, what is light, really? Why do these colors appear? What is it about this sight that moves something in me? He had no answers to these questions, and for the first time, that felt right. The not knowing was not a gap to be filled. It was an opening to be appreciated. The sunset was more beautiful for being mysterious. The world was richer for being inexhaustible. He stood there until the last colors faded from the sky, something he had never done before. He had always been too busy, too focused on getting somewhere, to simply stand and wonder. Now he realized how much he had missed by always moving, always doing, always knowing. The next day, he told Master Shu about the experience. "You are beginning to understand," the teacher said. "Knowledge is useful, but wonder is precious. Knowledge tells you what something is called, how it works, where it fits in your categories. Wonder lets you meet it fresh, without all those filters. Both have their place. But most people have too much knowledge and too little wonder. You are learning to restore the balance." "Will I always be able to see this way?" Haru asked. "Or will the newness fade over time? That depends on you. The habit of labeling and moving on is strong. It will try to reassert itself. You will have to keep choosing wonder, keep reminding yourself to really look, really listen, really be present. It is a practice, like any other. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes. But it is never automatic. It always requires a kind of gentle attention. When Haru eventually became a teacher himself, he carried Master Shu's approach with him. He asked questions more than he gave answers. He pushed his students to the edges of their knowledge and helped them become comfortable there. He taught them that wisdom was not about having answers, but about being able to live gracefully with questions. The truly wise person, he would tell them, echoing what his own teacher had shown him, is not the one who knows the most. It is the one who remains curious, the one who never stops wondering, the one who meets each moment with fresh eyes, ready to be surprised. Some students flourished under this teaching. Others went elsewhere, looking for certainty that Haru could not provide. But those who stayed discovered something precious. They learned to love their questions. They learned to see not knowing as a gift rather than a burden. They learned that the world was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than any answer could contain. Both Goro and Master Shu show us what it means to live in wonder as a continuous practice. Goro found infinite discovery in a single village by never stopping his questioning. Shu taught his students that wisdom lives at the edge where knowing meets not knowing, and that this edge expands the more we learn. This is the mature fruit of the great doubt. It begins perhaps in crisis or confusion, when our certainties fail and we are forced to question. But it does not have to end there. It can grow into a way of being that transforms everything. The world becomes fresh again. Ordinary things reveal hidden depths. We discover that boredom and staleness were never about the world being dull. They were about us forgetting to wonder. Zen teaches us that every moment is an opportunity for awakening. Not because special moments contain special truths, but because any moment, fully met with presence and openness, reveals the mystery at the heart of existence. When we approach life with the great doubt as our companion, we stop sleepwalking through our days. We become available to what is actually here, in all its strangeness and beauty. The questions we have explored tonight do not need to be resolved. They can live in us, keeping us humble, keeping us curious, keeping us alive to the wonder that surrounds us always. What is this? Who am I? What remains when certainty falls away? These questions are not problems. They are doorways that never close. They are invitations that never expire. They are the path itself, stretching endlessly before us, always fresh, always new. Take a breath now and feel yourself present in this moment. Let your eyes soften as if seeing the world for the first time. There is wonder here, quiet and patient, waiting for you to notice. We have journeyed together through many facets of the great doubt tonight. Now we come to the final teaching of the evening, the place where all of this leads. After all the questioning, after all the wondering, after all the releasing of certainty, what remains? Where does the great doubt finally bring us to rest? The answer is beautifully simple. It brings us here, to this moment, to this breath, to the quiet presence that exists before all our questions and remains after they have done their work. The great doubt is not meant to leave us spinning forever in uncertainty. It is not a permanent state of confusion or anxiety. It is more like a fire that burns away what is false, leaving only what is real. And what is real, when we finally stop grasping for answers, is simply this: being here, being present, being at peace with not knowing, because we have discovered that peace was never about knowing in the first place. Zen masters sometimes speak of returning to ordinary mind after the great questioning has done its work. The seeker goes out into the wilderness of doubt, questions everything, loses all footing, and then, somehow, finds themselves back home, doing ordinary things, but seeing them with new eyes. The journey was necessary, but the destination was always right here. Tonight, as we prepare for rest, we can let the questions settle. They do not need to be resolved. They can simply be present, like old friends who have traveled far with us and now sit quietly by the fire. The not knowing that once felt like a problem can become a soft blanket, a permission to stop struggling, a doorway into peace. Let us explore a story that shows how one seeker found this rest. In a land of high plateaus and wide skies, there lived a woman named Kaya, who had spent most of her life searching. As a young woman, she had felt a longing she could not name, a sense that something important was missing from her life. She had tried to fill this longing in many ways. She had pursued success in her work. She had sought love and built a family. She had accumulated knowledge and experiences. But the longing remained, quiet and persistent, underneath everything she did. In her middle years, she began to search more deliberately. She studied with teachers who spoke of enlightenment and liberation. She practiced meditation and contemplation. She read the words of sages from many traditions. She asked the deep questions that the great doubt brings. Who am I? What is real? What remains when everything I cling to falls away? These questions opened her. They stripped away layers of assumption and habit. They showed her how much of her life had been built on foundations she had never examined. She saw how she had defined herself by her roles and achievements, and how those definitions had limited her. She saw how she had chased after happiness in things that could never truly satisfy. She saw how much fear and grasping had been running beneath the surface of her days. The searching was painful at times, disorienting, like walking through fog without a map. There were moments when she wanted to turn back, to return to the comfortable certainties she had left behind. But something in her knew that those certainties had been false, and she could not pretend to believe in them anymore. So she kept going, because she sensed that something true lay on the other side. Years passed. Kaya grew older. Her hair turned grey and her face lined with the marks of time. She was no longer the eager seeker she had been. The fire of her questioning had burned long and hot, consuming much of what she thought she knew. But she had not found the final answer she had been looking for. There had been glimpses, moments of clarity, experiences that hinted at something vast and free. But nothing permanent. Nothing she could hold on to. She began to wonder if she had been wrong all along. Perhaps there was no final answer. Perhaps all her seeking had been chasing a mirage. This thought brought a strange kind of grief, but also something else. A tiredness that went beyond the body. A willingness to stop that she had never felt before. One autumn evening, Kaya was sitting outside her small house, watching the sun set over the plateau. She had sat in this same spot countless times over the years. The view was familiar, the colors predictable, the routine of evenings settling well known. And yet, something was different. She noticed that she was not searching anymore. The restless energy that had driven her for so long was quiet. The questions that had burned in her were still present, but they no longer demanded answers. They simply rested in her, like stones that had settled to the bottom of a clear pool. She looked at the sunset, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was not looking for anything in it. She was not trying to have a spiritual experience or achieve a state of enlightenment. She was just looking, just present, just here. The colors deepened as the sun approached the horizon. Oranges and reds and purples painted the sky in patterns that would never be repeated exactly this way again. Kaya watched without commentary, without interpretation, without needing the moment to be anything other than what it was. And in that simplicity, something she had been seeking for decades quietly arrived. It was not dramatic. There were no fireworks or visions or overwhelming emotions. There was just this: the sky, the colors, the cool air on her skin, the sound of birds settling for the night, her own breath, rising and falling, a completeness that needed nothing added. She realized, with a gentle surprise, that this was what she had been looking for all along. Not a special state, not a final answer, not enlightenment as she had imagined it. Just this ordinary moment, fully met, without the veil of seeking hanging between her and what was here. The questions had not been answered. They had simply stopped mattering. Or rather, they had done their work and could now rest. They had burned away her false certainties, her grasping for something other than what was present, her belief that peace was somewhere else, some other time, some achievement yet to come. What remained was just being here. And being here, it turned out, was enough. She sat until the stars came out, feeling no need to move or do anything at all. The peace she had sought for so long was not an experience that came and went. It was more like the ground itself, always present, always supporting, whether she noticed it or not. Her years of seeking had not created this peace. They had simply worn away the barriers that had kept her from seeing it. An old friend came to visit her the following week. This friend had known Kaya through all her years of searching and had often worried that she would never find peace. "You seem different," the friend observed. "There is a stillness in you that was not there before." Kaya smiled. "I stopped looking." "Did you find what you were looking for?" Kaya considered the question. How could she explain what had happened? It was not that she had found something that had been hidden. It was more that she had stopped believing something was hidden. She had stopped waiting for a future moment when everything would finally be complete. "I found that what I was looking for was never missing," she said finally. "I was just too busy searching to notice it. All those years, I thought peace was something I had to achieve, some state I had to reach. But peace was here all along, hidden underneath my seeking. When the seeking finally exhausted itself, peace was just here. It had been waiting patiently for me to stop running past it. So the searching was a waste. No, the searching was necessary. I could not have simply decided to stop seeking. The seeking had to run its course. It had to burn through everything I thought I knew, everything I was grasping at, everything I believed would save me. Only when there was nothing left to seek did I discover that nothing had ever been missing." Her friend looked puzzled. "But you asked so many questions. You doubted everything. What happened to all that doubt?" Kaya looked out at the plateau, at the familiar landscape she had seen every day for years. "The doubt is still here. I still do not know who I am, not really. I still cannot explain what this life is or why anything exists. The questions remain, but they do not trouble me anymore. They have become companions rather than tormentors. I can rest with them now, without needing them to be answered. She paused, searching for words to express something that was difficult to capture. It is like the difference between a question that demands an answer and a question that simply opens you. For years, my questions demanded answers. They were urgent, driven, restless. Now they just open me. They keep me humble, curious, present. They remind me that I do not know, and that not knowing is not a problem. Not knowing is actually a kind of freedom. In the years that followed, people sometimes came to Kaya hoping she could teach them what she had found. She always felt a little uncomfortable with this because she did not feel she had anything special to teach. She had simply worn herself out with seeking until only presence remained. That was not a technique or a path. It was more like what happens when you stop running and finally let yourself rest. But she would sit with these visitors, and sometimes her presence alone seemed to help them. They would arrive full of questions and seeking, and something in her stillness would quiet them. Not because she gave them answers, but because she showed them what it looked like to be at peace with not having answers. The great doubt is a gift, she would tell them. It takes everything away that you do not really need. It burns through your false certainties and leaves only what is true. What is true is very simple. It is just this moment, this breath, this presence that does not need to know anything in order to be at peace. When you stop demanding answers, you discover that the questions themselves are a kind of grace. They keep you open. They keep you humble. They bring you back, again and again, to the only place where peace actually lives, which is right here, right now. This story shows us where the great doubt finally leads. Kaya spent decades seeking, questioning, doubting, and in the end, she found herself right where she had always been, but seeing it with completely different eyes. The questions had not been answered. They had simply been transformed from burdens into blessings. Throughout our exploration tonight, we have seen this pattern again and again. The scholar Jiro found wisdom when he admitted he did not know. The potter Hana found her art alive again when she released her mastery and wondered. The guide Mira found her way when her maps failed, and she had to see fresh. The widow Sora found peace when she stopped demanding that her loss make sense. The merchant Bowen found freedom when he released his need to control. The seeker Koji found rest when he let the journey be the destination. The gardener Emmy found her garden most alive when she kept it always changing. The old man Goro found infinite discovery in a single village by never stopping his wandering. Each of them discovered the same truth from a different angle. Not knowing is not a problem to be solved. It is a doorway to be entered. When we can rest in not knowing, when we can hold our questions lightly, when we can stop demanding that life makes sense before we will be at peace, something opens. We find ourselves at home in the mystery. We discover that we were always at home. We just could not see it through all our seeking. This is the deepest teaching of the great doubt. It is not about finding answers. It is about transforming our relationship with questions. It is not about achieving certainty. It is about discovering that peace does not require certainty. We can rest without knowing. We can be at ease with mystery. We can let the questions live in us as companions rather than tormentors, as openings rather than problems. Let us explore one final story that shows this truth. In a monastery where monks had practiced for many generations, there lived an old teacher named Master Wen. who was known for saying very little. Other teachers gave long lectures and detailed instructions. Master Wen mostly sat in silence. When students asked him questions, he would often just smile or nod or shake his head. Words, when they came from him, were rare and precious. A young monk named Taro had been at the monastery for several years. He had studied with the other teachers and learned many things. He could recite texts and explain doctrines and discuss the finer points of philosophy. But he had never been able to get anything from Master Wen. The old teacher's silence frustrated him. One evening, Taro found Master Wen sitting alone in the garden, watching the moon rise. He sat down nearby, determined to finally get some teaching from this mysterious old man. "Master, I have studied here for years. I have learned much from the other teachers, but I have never understood what you are trying to teach. You say nothing. You give no instructions. What is your teaching?" Master Wen did not answer immediately. He continued watching the moon, which was nearly full and very bright. The garden was silver with its light. Finally he spoke. "What are you seeking?" Taro had prepared for this. "I am seeking understanding. I want to know the truth about life, about myself, about the nature of reality." "And have you found it?" Taro hesitated. "I have found pieces. I have had insights. But there is always more. The final understanding still eludes me." Master Wen nodded slowly. "And you believe that when you find this final understanding, you will be at peace?" "Yes, that is what I believe." The old teacher turned to look at Taro directly. His eyes were calm and deep, reflecting the moonlight. "What if there is no final understanding? What if the peace you are seeking does not come from understanding at all?" Taro felt confused. "Then what is the point of all this study? Why do we spend years learning and practicing?" "The study and practice are useful. They clear away certain confusions. They prepare the ground. But they cannot give you what you are really seeking. No teaching can give it to you. No understanding can capture it." "Then what can?" Master Wen smiled gently. "Nothing. That is the secret. Nothing gives it to you because it is not something that can be given or achieved or understood. It is simply what is here when you stop seeking. It is what remains when all your questions have exhausted themselves. It is this moment, just as it is, without needing anything added." He gestured at the garden around them, the moonlit stones and trees, the soft sounds of night. "This, right now, this is what you have been looking for. But as long as you keep seeking for something else, you cannot see it. As long as you believe peace is somewhere other than here, something other than this, you will miss it." Taro looked around at the garden. He had sat in this garden many times, but always his mind had been elsewhere, thinking about teachings, planning his practice, seeking understanding. Now, for a moment, he let all of that go. He just looked. The garden was beautiful. The moonlight was beautiful. The silence was beautiful. His own presence, sitting here, breathing, being aware, was somehow part of the beauty. There was nothing missing. There was nothing that needed to be added or achieved or understood. He noticed the way the moon's shadows fell across the stones, creating patterns that would shift as the night went on. He heard the small sounds of the garden at night, insects and wind, and the distant call of a night bird. He felt the cool air on his skin and the solid ground beneath him. All of it was simply here, asking nothing, offering everything. The seeking mind tried to rise again, tried to turn this into an experience to be grasped and understood. But Taro let it settle. He did not need to make anything of this moment. He did not need to remember it or repeat it or understand what it meant. He could simply be here, in the middle of it, part of the moonlight and the silence and the mystery. "I see," he said softly. And then, realizing that even this was too much, he said nothing more. They sat together in silence as the moon rose higher. No teaching was given. No understanding was transmitted. There was just this: two people sitting in a garden, moonlight on stones, the mystery of being alive, neither understood nor needing to be understood. When they finally rose to return to their rooms, Master Wen placed a hand briefly on Taro's shoulder. It was the most intimate gesture Taro had ever seen from the old teacher. No words were spoken, but Taro understood. Something had passed between them that was beyond words. A recognition, a welcoming, an acknowledgement that Taro had glimpsed what all the teaching was pointing toward. In the days that followed, Taro continued his studies. He still learned from the other teachers, still practiced, still asked questions. But something had shifted. He no longer believed that peace was waiting for him at the end of his seeking. He had tasted it that night in the garden, and he knew now where to find it. Not in answers, not in understanding, not in some future achievement. Simply here, simply now, simply in the willingness to stop seeking, even for a moment, and let what is already present reveal itself. Years later, when Taro himself had become a teacher, students would sometimes ask him about the night with Master Wen. He found it difficult to explain. Words always seemed to miss the point. "He did not teach me anything," Taro would say. "He just helped me stop seeking long enough to see what was already here. The great doubt had burned through everything I thought I knew. And when there was nothing left to seek, I found what I had been looking for all along. Not an answer, not an understanding, just this moment, just being here, just the peace that comes when we finally stop running away from where we already are." Both Kaya and Taro discovered the same simple truth. After all the questioning, after all the seeking, after all the burning away of false certainties, what remains is just this moment, this breath, this presence that was here all along, waiting for us to stop running past it. The great doubt does not leave us lost. It brings us home. It strips away everything we do not need, everything we were clinging to that was blocking our view. And when the stripping is done, we find ourselves exactly where we started, but seeing it for the first time. The ordinary world, the ordinary moment, the ordinary act of being alive, revealed as the extraordinary gift it always was. Throughout our journey tonight, we have met many travelers on this path. Jiro the scholar, who discovered wisdom by admitting he did not know. Yuki, who received an impossible question and found stillness in the gaps between her thoughts. Taro the farmer, who asked, "What is this?" until something opened. Hana the potter, who found her art alive again when she wondered. Master Wen, who set down his reputation and found freedom. Mira the guide, who learned to see when her maps failed. Sora, who found peace by accepting what could not be understood. Bowen, who learned to dance with life instead of controlling it. Koji, who discovered that seeking itself was the path. Emi the gardener, who kept everything alive by keeping everything changing. Goro, who found infinite wonder in a single village. Master Shu and Haru, who learned that the edge of not knowing is where we come most alive. Each of these stories points to the same truth. The great doubt is not our enemy. It is a gift that burns away what we do not need and reveals what was always here. Not knowing is not a problem. It is a doorway into peace. Zen teaches that enlightenment is not somewhere else. It is here. It is not something special to achieve. It is the most ordinary thing in the world, which is simply being present, simply being aware, simply being at peace with what is. The great doubt clears the way for us to see this. It burns away our illusions of needing something more. And what remains is enough. It was always enough. We just could not see it before. As you rest here now, you do not need to resolve any questions. You do not need to understand anything. You do not need to achieve any state or reach any goal. The questions can rest beside you, quiet companions who have traveled far and now sit peacefully as night deepens. The not knowing can become a soft space, an openness, a permission to simply be. This moment is complete. This breath is enough. You are already home. You have always been home. The great doubt has simply helped you see it. Let your eyes close gently now and feel the weight of your body settling. The questions can rest. The seeking can rest. There is nothing more you need to know tonight. We have traveled far together tonight, through stories and teachings that point toward a simple truth. The great doubt is not something to fear. It is a gift that opens us to what is real. We have seen how certainty can become a cage, and how the courage to not know can set us free. We have discovered that some questions are not meant to be answered but carried with us as companions, keeping us humble and awake. We have witnessed how life itself can shake our foundations and, in doing so, open doors we never knew were there. We have learned that the seeking itself is the path, and that wonder is not something we lose, but something we can recover. And finally, we have come to rest in the simple truth that peace does not require answers. It only requires presence. It only requires being here, fully, without needing this moment to be different than it is. The questions you carry do not need to be resolved tonight. They can rest beside you now, quiet friends who have done their work and ask nothing more. The not knowing that once felt like a burden can become a soft openness, a willingness to let life be mysterious, a doorway into the peace that was always here. You are already home. You have always been home. The great doubt has simply helped you see it. Let yourself rest now. Let the questions settle. Let this moment be enough, because it is, and it always was. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.